The morning sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps as Officer David Thompson's fist connected with the black woman's face, sending her crashing to the concrete. Blood trickled from her lip as handcuffs clicked around her wrists. What Thompson didn't know what would destroy his life in exactly 47 minutes was that the woman he'd just assaulted was Federal Judge Diana Washington, the very judge who would be presiding over his corruption trial that morning. Friends, this is a story of arrogance meeting justice in the most devastating way possible. Stay with me until the end and drop a comment about which city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories of justice travel. The September morning in downtown Atlanta carried that peculiar southern warmth that promised another sweltering day ahead. Judge Diana Washington pulled into the courthouse parking garage at 7:43 a.m., 15 minutes earlier than usual. She preferred arriving before the morning rush, using those quiet moments to review case files and prepare mentally for the day's proceedings. At 52, Diana had spent the last 18 years on the federal bench, earning a reputation as one of the most respected jurists in the 11th Circuit. This morning, however, felt different. She'd deliberately chosen to dress down a simple navy blazer over dark slacks, her judicial robes packed in the leather satchel she carried. The decision wasn't random. Today's docket included the high-profile case of Officer David Thompson and 3 fellow officers accused of brutality and corruption. Diana had learned long ago that sometimes observing the courthouse ecosystem as a regular citizen provided insights that the elevated position of the bench could never offer. She parked her modest Honda Accord, another deliberate choice that morning, instead of her usual Mercedes, and gathered her materials. The leather satchel contained not just her robes, but also hundreds of pages of depositions, evidence summaries, and the shocking body camera footage that had somehow survived despite the defendant's attempts to destroy it. The case against Thompson was damning, but Diana knew from experience that police corruption cases were notoriously difficult to prosecute. Juries tended to give officers the benefit of the doubt, and the thin blue line often closed ranks to protect its own. As she walked through the parking garage, her heels echoing against the concrete, Diana's mind was already in the courtroom. She'd presided over thousands of cases, but police brutality trials always carried extra weight. As a black woman who'd climbed through the ranks of the legal system, she'd witnessed firsthand how justice could be twisted, delayed, or denied based on the color of one's skin or the uniform one wore. The morning air hit her face as she exited the garage, carrying with it the smell of brewing coffee from the cart vendor who always set up early at the corner. Marcus the vendor had been there every morning for the past decade. He looked up as she approached his weathered face, breaking into a smile of recognition, though he didn't quite place her without her usual judicial attire. "Morning, ma'am. The usual?" he asked, already reaching for a cup. "Not today, Marcus. Running a bit behind," Diana replied with a warm smile, shifting her heavy satchel to her other shoulder. She'd made it halfway up the courthouse steps when she heard the voice, sharp, authoritative, and tinged with something darker. "Hey, you stop right there." Diana turned to see Officer David Thompson standing at the bottom of the steps, his hand resting on his service weapon. She recognized him immediately from the case files, 6 feet 2 inches of barely contained aggression wrapped in a police uniform. His face, which had seemed merely hard in photographs, was twisted with suspicion and something that looked dangerously close to contempt. "Can I help you, officer?" Diana asked calmly, though her pulse quickened. She knew this dance, had seen it played out too many times in the cases that came before her bench. Thompson climbed the steps 2 at a time, his partner, Officer Jake Martinez, trailing behind. "Where do you think you're going?" "Into the courthouse," Diana replied evenly. "I have business here this morning." Thompson's eyes narrowed as he looked her up and down, taking in her professional but understated appearance. "What kind of business?" "Legal business," Diana said, maintaining her composure despite the growing knot in her stomach. She could see where this was heading, had witnessed this scene play out in countless police reports and victim testimonies. The difference was this time, she was the target. Legal business, Thompson repeated mockingly. You a lawyer? Something like that, Diana replied, reaching slowly for her satchel. I have my credentials. Don't reach for anything. Thompson barked, his hand tightening on his weapon. Several people had stopped to watch their morning routines interrupted by the unfolding drama. Martinez stepped closer, his body language mirroring Thompson's aggression. You match the description of someone we're looking for, he said, though his eyes betrayed the lie. There was no description. There was no suspect. There was only a black woman in professional attire attempting to enter a courthouse while black. Officer Thompson, Diana said, using his name deliberately, watching as surprise flickered across his features. I can assure you I'm authorized to be here. If you'll just let me show you. How do you know my name? Thompson demanded, stepping closer, invading her personal space. His breath smelled of stale coffee and cigarettes. You've been watching me, planning something. The accusation was so absurd that Diana almost laughed, but she recognized the dangerous territory they'd entered. Thompson was constructing a narrative in real-time, building justification for whatever he was about to do next. Your name tag, Diana said, simply nodding toward his chest. It says Thompson. But Thompson was beyond logic now. He'd committed to a course of action, and backing down would mean admitting he'd been wrong to stop her in the first place. You're being evasive, suspicious. What's in the bag? Legal documents, case files, nothing that concerns... Let me see, Thompson demanded, reaching for her satchel. Diana instinctively pulled back. You don't have the right to search my belongings without probable cause. It was the wrong thing to say. Or perhaps in Thompson's mind it was exactly what he'd been waiting for. His face darkened with rage. You're going to lecture me about the law. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Martinez, this one's a real legal expert. Probably got her degree from YouTube University. Several courthouse employees had gathered at the top of the steps, watching with a mixture of concern and resignation. Diana recognized a few faces, clerks and administrative staff who'd worked in the building for years. She saw recognition dawn in some of their eyes, saw them start to move forward, but Thompson wasn't paying attention to anyone but his target. I'm going to ask you one more time, Thompson said, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. What's in the bag? And I'm going to tell you one more time, Diana replied, her own voice steady despite her racing heart, that you have no legal authority to search my belongings. I've committed no crime. You've articulated no reasonable suspicion, and... The blow came without warning. Thompson's open hand struck the side of her face with enough force to send her stumbling backward. Her satchel flew from her shoulder, hitting the concrete steps and spilling its contents. Legal briefs, case files, and her judicial robes tumbling out in a cascade of paper and black fabric. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Someone shouted, "Hey!" Another voice called out, "That's assault!" But Thompson was already moving, grabbing Diana's arm and twisting it behind her back. Resisting arrest, refusing to comply with lawful orders, suspicious behavior. I haven't resisted anything, Diana protested as the cold metal of handcuffs bit into her wrists. This is assault. This is false arrest. You have no probable cause. Shut up, Thompson snarled, pushing her forward roughly. Her knee hit the steps, tearing her slacks and drawing blood. You think you're so smart, don't you? Think you know the law better than me? Martinez had moved to block the growing crowd, his hand on his radio. Back up, everyone. This is police business. This is assault, a brave voice called out from the crowd. Diana recognized it as belonging to Tom Chen, a public defender she'd known for years. I'm recording this. This is unlawful. You want to join her? Thompson threatened, momentarily distracted from Diana. It was then that Chief Court Security Officer Angela Foster pushed through the crowd. A 20-year veteran of courthouse security, Angela had seen everything, but her face paled as she recognized the woman in handcuffs. Officer Thompson, Angela said urgently, you need to stop. You don't understand who... I don't care if she's the Queen of England, Thompson cut her off. She's going downtown for processing." "No," Angela said firmly, stepping between Thompson and Diana. "You don't understand. This is another friend of hers." Thompson laughed bitterly. "You people always stick together, don't you? Well, your friend here is under arrest for resisting arrest, failure to comply, and probable intent to commit a crime." Intent to commit a crime. Diana couldn't help but interject, despite the pain radiating from her knee and face. "What crime?" "Walking while black. Knowing my rights while black." Thompson yanked her to her feet, roughly causing her to cry out in pain. "Add disorderly conduct to the charges." Angela pulled out her phone, frantically dialing. "Sheriff Morrison, you need to get here immediately. We have a situation. Officer Thompson has arrested—" She lowered her voice, but Diana could still hear her urgent whisper. "He's arrested, Judge Washington." But Thompson wasn't listening. He was in his element now, playing to the crowd, to his partner, to the narrative he'd created in his mind. He'd found someone he perceived as uppity, someone who dared to challenge his authority, and he was going to make an example of her. "Let's go," he said, pushing Diana toward his patrol car parked at the curb. "You can explain your legal business downtown." As Diana was forced past the scattered contents of her satchel, she saw her judicial ID badge lying face up on the steps, her photo and title clearly visible to anyone who cared to look. But Thompson walked right past it, his tunnel vision focused only on completing his arrest. Tom Chen had moved closer, his phone held high, recording everything. "I'm Tom Chen, Public Defender Badge number 4478. It is 7:58 a.m. on September 15th. I am witnessing what appears to be an unlawful arrest of a citizen who has committed no crime." "Back off or you're next," Martinez warned, but Tom held his ground. Diana was pushed into the back of the patrol car, the door slamming with a finality that echoed across the courthouse steps. Through the window, she could see Angela Foster gathering up her scattered belongings, including the judicial robes and ID badge, her face a mask of horror and disbelief. As the patrol car pulled away, Diana caught a glimpse of more courthouse employees streaming out of the building. Word was spreading fast. She saw Judge Patricia Hoffman, a colleague from the district court, standing frozen in shock. She saw Bernard Williams, the chief prosecutor, pulling out his phone with shaking hands. In the front seat, Thompson was laughing with Martinez. "Did you see her face when I asked what was in the bag? Legal documents," he mimicked in a high-pitched voice. "These people think they can just walk in anywhere, act like they own the place." "She did seem to know her way around," Martinez offered hesitantly. "Probably casing the joint," Thompson said confidently. "Been watching too many legal dramas, thinks she knows how the system works. Well, she's about to get a real education in how things actually work." Diana remained silent in the back seat, her mind already working through the legal implications of what had just occurred. Assault under color of law. False arrest. Violation of civil rights under Section 1983. Conspiracy to violate civil rights if Martinez was deemed complicit. The irony wasn't lost on her. Thompson was supposed to stand trial before her this morning for similar charges, and he'd just committed the same crimes again, this time against the very judge who would have presided over his case. The patrol car turned into the underground entrance of the detention center, a place Diana had sent many defendants but had never seen from this perspective. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows as Thompson parked and came around to pull her from the vehicle. "Welcome to the real world," he said with satisfaction. "Hope you've got a good lawyer because you're going to need one." The booking area was a chaos of activity. Officers processing arrests from the night before, defendants waiting to be fingerprinted, the constant buzz of radios and conversation. Diana was pushed toward the booking desk where a tired-looking sergeant barely glanced up from his paperwork. "What have we got?" the sergeant asked routinely. "Disorderly conduct resisting arrest, failure to comply with lawful orders, suspicious behavior around a federal courthouse," Thompson rattled off. Caught her trying to enter the courthouse with a bag full of documents, refused to cooperate, became combative when questioned. The sergeant started typing. "Name, Refused to provide it, Thompson said, before Diana could speak. That's a lie, Diana said calmly. He never asked for my name, and I wanted on record that Officer Thompson struck me in the face and pushed me down, causing injury to my knee. I want a supervisor, and I want to file a formal complaint. The sergeant finally looked up, his fingers pausing over the keyboard. Something in Diana's bearing her calm authority, despite being in handcuffs, made him hesitate. "Ma'am, what's your name?" "Diana Washington," she replied clearly. "Judge Diana Washington, federal judge for the Northern District of Georgia. And Officer Thompson has just committed multiple felonies, including assault under color of law." The booking area seemed to freeze. Every officer within earshot turned to stare. The sergeant's face went pale, his eyes widening as he really looked at Diana for the first time. "She's lying," Thompson said quickly, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "She's just trying to—" The sergeant was already typing rapidly into his computer. His face went from pale to ashen as her information came up on the screen. "Oh my God," he whispered, then louder, "Oh my God." "What?" Thompson demanded, pushing forward to see the screen. The sergeant's hands were shaking as he pointed to the monitor. There, in official federal database records, was Diana's photograph, her title, her appointment date, her entire judicial history. The same woman standing before them in handcuffs, blood on her knee, a bruise forming on her face. "You arrested a federal judge," the sergeant said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You assaulted and arrested a federal judge." Thompson's face cycled through disbelief, recognition, and finally terror. "No, she didn't say." "I tried to show you my credentials," Diana said quietly. "Multiple witnesses saw me try to show you my identification. You struck me instead." The sergeant was already on his phone, his voice panicked. "Captain, we have a code red situation. Officer Thompson has arrested—" "Yes, sir. Judge Diana Washington." "Yes, the Judge Washington. She's in handcuffs. There are visible injuries." "Yes, sir, immediately." Within minutes, the booking area was flooded with supervisors, internal affairs officers, and courthouse officials. Diana stood calmly in the center of the chaos, still in handcuffs, as people scrambled around her. Thompson had backed against a wall, his face the color of ash. Martinez beside him, looking like he might be sick. Captain Robert Morrison burst through the doors, his usually composed face twisted with a mixture of fury and panic. He took one look at Diana and bellowed, "Get those cuffs off her now!" The sergeant fumbled with his keys, his hands shaking so badly he could barely fit them into the lock. "Judge Washington, I am so sorry, I had no idea." "You're not at fault, Sergeant," Diana said, as the cuffs finally came off. She rubbed her wrists, noting the red marks that would surely bruise. "You were just doing your job based on the false information provided by Officer Thompson." Angela Foster arrived carrying Diana's satchel and its contents, including the judicial robes. "Judge Washington, are you all right? We have the entire incident on courthouse security cameras, and at least 12 witnesses have come forward. Tom Chen has video footage from multiple angles." Captain Morrison approached carefully, as if Diana might explode at any moment. "Judge Washington, on behalf of the entire department, I want to apologize." "Captain," Diana interrupted calmly, "your apologies should wait until after Internal Affairs completes their investigation. What I need now is medical attention for my injuries, photographs for evidence, and a complete copy of all recordings, body cameras, booking area surveillance, and Officer Thompson's patrol car camera." "Of course, anything you need." "And, Captain," Diana continued, her voice carrying the authority of nearly 2 decades on the federal bench, "I'll be filing criminal charges against Officer Thompson for assault, false arrest, and deprivation of rights under color of law. The same charges, ironically, that he was supposed to face in my courtroom this morning." Morrison's face, if possible, paled further. Thompson was due in your court." "At 9:30 a.m., Diana confirmed. United States versus Thompson, Martinez, Phillips, and Kowalski. Charges of police brutality, conspiracy to violate civil rights, and falsification of police reports. Seems Officer Thompson has a pattern of behavior. Thompson made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a moan. "I didn't know," he whispered desperately. "I didn't know who you were." Diana turned to face him fully, for the first time since the handcuffs had come off. "That's exactly the point, Officer Thompson. You didn't know who I was, but you assumed you knew what I was. You saw a black woman approaching a courthouse and immediately decided I was a threat, a criminal, someone who didn't belong. You never asked for identification, never conducted a proper investigation, never followed any of the protocols you swore to uphold. But if I had known," Thompson started. "If you had known, you would have treated me with respect." Diana's voice was sharp now. "What about all the other black women you've encountered who weren't federal judges? Did they deserve to be struck, to be falsely arrested, to be humiliated and brutalized?" The room was silent, except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of radios crackling. "Your problem, Officer Thompson," Diana continued, "isn't that you arrested a judge. Your problem is that you believe your badge gives you the right to assault and arrest anyone who doesn't immediately bow to your authority, especially if they're black. The only difference between me and your other victims is that I have the power to ensure you face consequences." Captain Morrison cleared his throat. "Judge Washington, we'll need to reschedule your docket for this morning." "No," Diana said firmly. "I'll be taking the bench at 9:30 as scheduled." "But surely after this ordeal..." "Captain Officer Thompson and his co-defendants are entitled to their day in court, and they'll have it. The fact that Officer Thompson has now given me first-hand experience of his methods will be disclosed to all parties, and they can decide if they want to request recusal. But I will not let Officer Thompson's actions prevent me from doing my job." She turned to Angela Foster. "Angela, please ensure my robes are cleaned and ready, and contact the court clerk. Will need to add an emergency motion to this morning's docket." "What motion?" Angela asked, though she was already typing on her phone. "The prosecution will be filing additional charges against Officer Thompson based on this morning's incident. Assault on a federal official, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to interfere with a federal proceeding for starters." Bernard Williams, the chief prosecutor, had arrived during the conversation. "Judge Washington, given what's happened, we can request a postponement." "No postponements," Diana said firmly. "Justice delayed is justice denied, Mr. Williams. Officer Thompson wanted his day in court, and he'll have it. Though I suspect his attorney will have a much harder job now that Thompson has demonstrated his modus operandi so clearly." She looked around the room at the assembled officers, prosecutors, and court officials. "Let me be clear about something. What happened this morning isn't just about me. It's about a system that allows officers like Thompson to operate with impunity until they make the mistake of targeting someone with power. How many others have stood where I stood in handcuffs, brutalized and humiliated without the protection of a federal judgeship?" The room remained silent, the weight of her words settling over everyone like a heavy blanket. "Now," Diana said, straightening her blazer and wincing slightly at the pain in her knee, "I need medical attention, and then I have a court to prepare for. Mr. Williams, I trust you'll have the amended charges ready by 9:30. "Yes, Your Honor," Williams said quickly. "We'll be ready." As Diana was escorted to the medical unit, she passed Thompson and Martinez, who were now being read their rights by internal affairs officers. Thompson looked broken, his earlier arrogance completely evaporated, replaced by the dawning realization of what he'd done. "Judge Washington," he called out desperately. "Please, I have a family." Diana paused but didn't turn around. "So did all your victims, Officer Thompson. The difference is, they never got the chance to plead their case to you before you brutalized them." The medical examination was thorough and professionally conducted by Dr. Sarah Quinn, who documented every injury with photographs and detailed notes. The bruise on Diana's face had darkened to a deep purple. Her knee required cleaning and bandaging, and her wrists bore clear ligature marks from the too tight handcuffs. This is going to look even worse tomorrow, Dr. Quinn said softly as she took photographs. Judge Washington, I've seen a lot of police brutality cases come through here, but this is what happens every day, Doctor, Diana replied. The only unusual thing about today is that it happened to someone who can fight back. By 9:15, Diana was back at the courthouse, having entered through a private entrance to avoid the media circus that had already begun forming out front. Word had spread like wildfire through legal circles and social media. The courthouse was buzzing with tension and anticipation. In her chambers, Diana carefully put on her judicial robes, the black fabric falling around her like armor. Her assistant, Maria Santos, hovered nervously nearby. Your Honor, are you sure you should? Maria, Diana said gently but firmly. I've been preparing for this case for weeks. Officer Thompson's actions this morning don't change that. If anything, they've provided additional evidence of his pattern of behavior. The defense attorney, Mr. Carver, has requested an emergency meeting, Maria said. I'm sure he has, Diana replied dryly. Send him in. Richard Carver, Thompson's defense attorney, entered looking like he'd aged 10 years in the past 2 hours. Your Honor, given this morning's incident, I must request that you recuse yourself from this case. Diana settled into her chair, her hands folded on the desk. On what grounds, Mr. Carver? On the grounds that you're now a victim of my client, that you cannot possibly be impartial. Mr. Carver, Diana interrupted calmly. Your client assaulted me because he didn't know I was a judge. He treated me exactly as the prosecution alleges he treated the victims in the case before us. If anything, I now have unique insight into his methods. However, if you wish to make a formal motion for recusal, you may do so in open court on the record. Carver's shoulders slumped. Your Honor, my client wishes to explore the possibility of a plea agreement. That's between you and Mr. Williams, Diana said. But I should inform you that Mr. Williams will be filing additional charges based on this morning's incident. Your client assaulted a federal official, obstructed justice, and attempted to interfere with a federal proceeding. These are serious felonies that carry significant mandatory minimums. He didn't know, Carver started. Ignorance of a victim's identity is not a defense to assault, Mr. Carver. You know that. Your client's problem isn't that he assaulted a judge. It's that he assaulted anyone at all. At exactly 9:30 a.m., Diana entered her courtroom through the private entrance reserved for judges. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Journalists, legal observers, civil rights activists, and curious courthouse employees filled every available seat and stood along the walls. All rise, the bailiff called out. The Honorable Judge Diana Washington presiding. As Diana took her seat at the bench, the bruise on her face clearly visible despite her attempts to minimize it with makeup, a collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. She could see Thompson at the defendant's table, his head bowed, his shoulders shaking. Be seated, Diana said, her voice carrying clearly through the courtroom. Before we proceed with United States versus Thompson et al., there is a matter that must be addressed. This morning at approximately 7:50 a.m., I was physically assaulted and falsely arrested by the lead defendant, Officer David Thompson, as I attempted to enter this courthouse. The courtroom erupted in whispers and exclamations. Diana let it continue for a moment before raising her hand for silence. The incident was captured on multiple cameras and witnessed by numerous individuals. As a result, the prosecution will be filing additional charges. Mr. Carver, I assume you've discussed this with your client. Carver stood slowly. Yes, Your Honor. And at this time, we would like to request that you recuse yourself from this case. On what grounds? On the grounds that you are now a victim of my client and cannot possibly render an impartial judgment. Diana leaned forward slightly. Mr. Carver, let me ask you something. If your client had assaulted any other black woman this morning, a teacher, a store clerk, a stay-at-home mother, would you be requesting that she be removed from consideration as a victim because she might not be impartial about being assaulted? That's different, Your Honor. How is it different? Because I'm a judge, because I have power. The law doesn't make distinctions based on the victim's occupation or status. Assault is assault. False arrest is false arrest. Civil rights violations are civil rights violations. She paused, looking directly at Thompson, who finally raised his head to meet her gaze. However, Diana continued, I believe in the absolute integrity of our justice system. If you wish to file a formal motion for recusal, I will consider it. But I want you to think carefully about your argument. Are you saying that any judge who has been a victim of police brutality cannot preside over police brutality cases? Because if that's your position, Mr. Carver, you're going to have a very hard time finding any black judges who qualify under that standard. The courtroom was dead silent. Even the court reporter's fingers had paused over her keys. Carver whispered urgently with Thompson for a moment, then stood again. Your Honor, after consulting with my client, we withdraw our request for recusal. Very well. Mr. Williams, please present the amended charges. Bernard Williams stood a thick folder in his hands. Your Honor, the United States would like to file the following additional charges against Officer David Thompson assault on a federal official in violation of 18 U.S.C. Section 111. Deprivation of rights under color of law in violation of 18 U.S.C. Section 242, obstruction of justice in violation of 18 U.S.C. Section 1505, and conspiracy to interfere with a federal proceeding in violation of 18 U.S.C. Section 1512. Mr. Thompson. Diana addressed the defendant directly. Do you understand these additional charges? Thompson stood on shaking legs. Yes, Your Honor, he whispered. Do you have anything you'd like to say to the court? Thompson's mouth opened and closed several times before he managed to speak. I didn't know who you were. I know, Diana said simply. That's precisely the problem. You felt empowered to assault someone you perceived as powerless. The question this court must consider is how many other times you've done exactly that. She turned to the prosecution. Mr. Williams, are you ready to proceed with opening arguments on the original charges? Your Honor, Williams said. In light of this morning's events, the prosecution requests a brief recess to incorporate the new evidence into our presentation. How much time do you need? 1 hour, Your Honor. Diana looked at the defense table. Mr. Carver? No objection, Your Honor. We need time as well. Very well. Court is in recess until 10:45 a.m. Diana raised her gavel and brought it down with a sharp crack that seemed to echo Thompson's fate. As the courtroom emptied, Diana remained at the bench for a moment, looking at the space where Thompson had sat. In her 18 years as a judge, she had presided over thousands of cases, had seen the worst of humanity, and occasionally the best. But this was different. This was personal in a way that transcended the individual and spoke to something systemic, something rotten at the core of how justice was dispensed in America. Her assistant, Maria, appeared at the side entrance to her chambers. Your Honor, the media is going absolutely insane. CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, everyone wants a statement. No statements until after the trial, Diana said firmly. Justice doesn't happen in the media. It happens in this courtroom. The Attorney General's office called. The AG wants to speak with you personally. Diana almost smiled. I'm sure he does. Tell him I'll be available after court adjourns for the day. As she rose to return to her chambers, Diana caught sight of Angela Foster standing by the courtroom door. Angela had been holding Diana's satchel all morning, guarding it like a sentinel. Thank you, Angela, Diana said softly as she approached, for trying to warn them. For protecting my things. Angela's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Judge Washington, in my 20 years here, I've never seen anything like what happened this morning. The way he hit you, the way he... Her voice broke. Unfortunately, Diana said gently, what you saw this morning happens every day in this country. The only difference is that today It happened to someone who can ensure there are consequences. The hour recess passed quickly. Diana used the time to review the additional evidence that had been rapidly compiled, the courthouse security footage, showing Thompson striking her, the body camera footage, that Thompson had forgotten to turn off the cell phone videos from multiple angles that witnesses had already provided. Each piece of evidence was damning. The body camera footage was particularly revealing, catching Thompson's words clearly. These people think they can just walk in anywhere. The racial animus was unmistakable. When court reconvened, the atmosphere was electric. More media had arrived, and there were now representatives from the Department of Justice, the ACLU, the NAACP, and various other civil rights organizations. "Mr. Williams," Diana said once everyone was seated, "you may proceed with your opening statement." Williams stood buttoning his jacket. "Your Honor, members of the court, what we will prove today is not just that Officer David Thompson and his co-defendants committed acts of police brutality. We will prove that they did so as part of a pattern, a practice, a culture of violence that they believed made them untouchable." He paused, gesturing toward the defense table. "This morning, Officer Thompson provided us with a live demonstration of exactly how he operates. He saw a black woman approaching this courthouse, and without any investigation, without any probable cause, without even asking for identification, he assaulted her. He arrested her. He humiliated her." Williams walked closer to the jury box, his voice rising. "The only thing that makes this morning's victim different from the dozens of others we'll present is that this morning's victim happens to be a federal judge. But Officer Thompson didn't know that when he struck her. To him, she was just another black woman who needed to be put in her place." The opening statements continued for another hour, with Carver making a valiant but ultimately futile attempt to separate this morning's incident from the pattern of behavior alleged in the original charges. But everyone in the courtroom could see the writing on the wall. Thompson's actions had validated everything the prosecution had been claiming. The rest of the trial proceeded with a sense of inevitability. Witness after witness testified about their encounters with Thompson and his fellow officers. A young black man described being beaten during a traffic stop. A black mother told of being arrested in front of her children for questioning authority when she asked why she was being detained. Through it all, Diana presided with steady authority, her visible injuries a silent testament to the reality of the testimony being presented. She was scrupulously fair, sustaining and overruling objections based solely on the law, giving the defense every opportunity to present their case. But what case could they present? The video evidence was overwhelming. The pattern was undeniable. And sitting at the center of it all was the bruise on Diana's face growing darker as the day progressed, a purple badge of evidence that no amount of legal maneuvering could explain away. By 3 p.m., it was clear that Thompson's co-defendants were trying to distance themselves from him. Their attorneys requested separate trials, argued for severing their cases from his. The thin blue line was breaking self-preservation, overcoming loyalty. During a brief recess, Diana overheard Martinez in the hallway speaking urgently to his lawyer. "I tried to tell him she looked familiar. I tried to tell him to be careful. But David, he sees red sometimes, especially with certain people." Certain people. The euphemism hung in the air like a toxic cloud. When court reconvened for the afternoon session, Carver made one last desperate attempt. "Your Honor, my client would like to address the court directly." Diana studied Thompson for a long moment. "Does your client understand that anything he says can be used against him?" "He does, Your Honor." "Very well. Mr. Thompson, you may speak." Thompson stood slowly, as if his body had aged decades in the past few hours. "Your Honor, I want to apologize." "Go on," Diana said neutrally. "I was wrong. What I did this morning was wrong. I let my assumptions, my prejudices, I saw you and I just assumed." He trailed off, seeming to realize that every word was making things worse. "What did you assume, Officer Thompson?" Diana asked quietly. I assumed you didn't belong here. He admitted, his voice barely audible. I assumed you were what? Were someone who didn't matter. Thompson finished the words, falling like stones into still water. The courtroom was silent for a long moment. Then Diana spoke, her voice carrying the weight of centuries of injustice. Officer Thompson, that's the most honest thing you've said all day. You assumed I didn't matter, and that assumption gave you permission in your mind to assault me, to humiliate me, to violate my constitutional rights. The tragedy is not that you did this to a federal judge. The tragedy is that you've been doing this to people who don't matter for years, and until today, you've never faced any real consequences. She looked around the courtroom, making eye contact with the other defendants, the prosecutors, the observers. This case is not about me, Diana continued. It's about all the people who've stood where I stood this morning, who've been struck down literally and figuratively by those who swore to protect and serve them. The only difference between me and them is that I have the power to fight back, the credibility, to be believed, the resources to ensure justice. But justice shouldn't depend on the victim's status or power. Justice should be blind, truly blind, not selectively blind, based on race or class or occupation. By the end of the day, the prosecution had presented such overwhelming evidence that even Carver seemed to have given up hope. The body camera footage from multiple incidents, the witness testimony, the paper trail of complaints that had been buried or ignored at all, painted a picture of systematic abuse that was impossible to deny. As Diana prepared to adjourn for the day, her phone buzzed with a text from the Chief Judge of the 11th Circuit. Diana, the entire federal judiciary stands behind you. What happened today is an affront to the rule of law itself. Thompson picked the wrong person to assault, but more importantly, he picked the wrong principle to violate. Court is adjourned until 9 a.m. tomorrow, Diana announced, bringing down her gavel. As the courtroom began to empty, she noticed a young black woman in the gallery who had been there all day, tears streaming down her face. Diana made her way over to her. Are you all right? The woman looked up, her eyes wide with recognition. Judge Washington, Officer Thompson did the same thing to me 2 years ago. Almost exactly the same thing. But when I tried to file a complaint, they said it was my word against his. They said no one would believe me. Seeing you up there, seeing him finally face justice, thank you. Diana felt her own eyes burn with unshed tears. What's your name? Jasmine. Jasmine Fuller. Jasmine, you're the one who deserves thanks. You and all the others who tried to speak up, who tried to fight back despite the system working against you. You paved the way for this moment. Your courage mattered even when it seemed like no one was listening. That evening, Diana finally returned to her chambers, exhausted physically and emotionally. The media circus outside had grown even larger, with protesters holding signs reading, "Justice for Judge Washington," and "How many more?" Maria brought her a cup of tea and a stack of messages. The president called, the attorney general, the congressional Black Caucus, basically everyone. They can all wait, Diana said, sinking into her chair. Right now, I just need to process what happened. Your Honor, can I ask you something? Maria said hesitantly. Of course. Were you scared this morning when Thompson was... Diana considered the question carefully. I was terrified, she admitted. Not just of the physical violence, but of the realization that if I hadn't been who I am, this would have been just another unreported incident of police brutality. How many Dianas are out there who aren't judges, who don't have the power to fight back? The next morning, day 2 of the trial began with a surprise. Carver stood as soon as court was called to order. Your Honor, after extensive consultation with my client and given the overwhelming evidence presented, including the events of yesterday morning, Mr. Thompson wishes to change his plea to guilty on all charges. The courtroom erupted. Diana had to bang her gavel several times to restore order. Mr. Thompson, please stand, she instructed. Do you understand that by pleading guilty, you are giving up your right to a trial? Yes, Your Honor. Thompson said, his voice stronger than it had been the day before. Do you understand the charges against you and the potential sentences you face? Yes, Your Honor. And you are entering this plea voluntarily without coercion? Thompson seemed to consider this for a moment. Your Honor, the only coercion is my conscience. What I did yesterday, what I've done to others, I can't deny it anymore. Not when the evidence is right there on your face. Diana touched her bruised cheek unconsciously, then lowered her hand. Mr. Thompson, I will accept your guilty plea. However, I want to make something very clear. This plea does not erase the harm you've caused. It does not restore the dignity you stole from your victims. It is merely the first step in acknowledging the wrong you've done. She turned to the other defendants. I understand Mr. Martinez, Mr. Phillips, and Mr. Kowalski wish to proceed with their trials separately. Their attorneys confirmed this, and Diana set new trial dates. But everyone in the courtroom knew that Thompson's guilty plea had fundamentally changed the equation. Their former leader, their shield, had admitted to everything. Their own prospects had dimmed considerably. The sentencing phase for Thompson was set for 2 weeks later, allowing time for victim impact statements to be collected and pre-sentencing reports to be prepared. As court adjourned, Diana noticed that Thompson remained seated at the defense table, his head in his hands. Officer Thompson, she called out. He looked up, surprised. You said something yesterday about seeing red when dealing with certain people. I want you to think about that over the next 2 weeks. I want you to really examine where that rage comes from, why you feel entitled to act on it, and what it's cost not just you, but everyone you've hurt along the way. Thompson nodded slowly. Judge Washington, I know it doesn't mean much now, but I am sorry. Not just for what I did to you, but for all of it. Apologies are a start, Mr. Thompson. But justice requires more than words. It requires accountability change and a commitment to never allowing this to happen again. As Diana left the courthouse that evening, she was met by a crowd of supporters, civil rights leaders, and media. This time she stopped to speak. What happened to me yesterday morning was not unique or special, she said into the forest of microphones. It happens every day in this country to people whose names you'll never know, whose stories will never make the news. The only thing special about my case is that I have the power and position to ensure there are consequences. A reporter shouted, Judge Washington, do you think Officer Thompson's guilty plea is justice? Diana considered the question. Justice would be a system where Officer Thompson never felt empowered to assault anyone in the first place. Justice would be accountability for all victims, not just those with federal judgeships. What we have today is a start, but it's not justice, not yet. The 2 weeks between the guilty plea and sentencing flew by. Diana received thousands of letters and emails from around the country, other victims of police brutality, sharing their stories, thanking her for standing up, for not accepting a quiet settlement, or allowing the incident to be brushed under the rug. She also received death threats, racist screeds, and hate mail from those who saw Thompson as a victim of political correctness, or a warrior being sacrificed on the altar of wokeness. Diana turned all of these over to the FBI and tried not to let them affect her. But late at night, alone in her home, she would sometimes shake with delayed reaction to the trauma. The day of Thompson's sentencing arrived gray and drizzly-fitting weather for such a somber occasion. The courtroom was once again packed, but the energy was different, less electric, more gravely anticipatory. Diana entered the courtroom with her head held high. The bruise on her face had faded to a sickly yellow-green, but it was still visible, a reminder of what had brought them all here. Mr. Thompson, please stand for sentencing, Diana instructed. Thompson stood his attorney beside him. He looked like he'd aged years in the 2 weeks since his plea. Before I pronounce sentence, I want to address something, Diana began. Over the past 2 weeks, I've received communications suggesting that you, Mr. Thompson, are the real victim here, that you're being made an example of because of who I am. So let me be clear, you are not being sentenced because you assaulted a judge. You are being sentenced because you assaulted a human being. You violated the oath you took to protect and serve. You betrayed the public trust. She looked down at the pre-sentencing report. The report indicates that there have been 37 complaints filed against you over your 12-year career. 37. Most of them from black citizens, most of them alleging excessive force, false arrest, or civil rights violations. Until now, none resulted in serious consequences. Diana looked up at Thompson. Do you have anything to say before I pronounce sentence? Thompson stepped forward slightly. Your Honor, I've had 2 weeks to think about what you said about where my rage comes from. I don't have a good answer. Maybe it was how I was raised. Maybe it was the culture in the department. Maybe it was just me being a bad person. But I know now that I caused real harm to real people. I destroyed trust. I violated rights. And I became the very thing that good police officers stand against. He paused, seeming to gather himself. I don't ask for leniency. I ask only that my sentence serve as a warning to other officers who might be headed down the same path I took. This badge, he touched his chest where his badge used to be. It's not a license to hurt people. It's a responsibility to protect them. All of them. I forgot that. I forgot it a long time ago. Diana nodded slowly. Mr. Thompson, this court sentences you to 15 years in federal prison for the combined charges of assault on a federal official deprivation of rights under color of law and the various counts of police brutality to which you've pled guilty. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. 15 years was substantial. Furthermore, Diana continued, you are permanently barred from ever serving in law enforcement again. You will pay restitution to all identified victims. You will undergo mandatory civil rights training and counseling. And, Mr. Thompson, I sincerely hope that you use these 15 years to reflect on how you got here and how you can emerge as a better person. The gavel came down with finality. As Thompson was led away in handcuffs, the same kind he'd placed on Diana just 2 weeks earlier, he turned back to look at her one last time. Their eyes met across the courtroom. And in that moment, Diana saw something she hadn't expected: genuine remorse. Whether it would last, whether it would translate into real change, only time would tell. The courtroom began to empty, but Diana remained seated at the bench for a moment longer. Her judicial assistant approached quietly. Your Honor, there's someone here to see you. Says it's important. Diana looked up to see an elderly black woman, probably in her 80s, standing near the gallery rail. She was impeccably dressed, her gray hair styled elegantly, her posture straight despite her age. Your Honor, the woman said, her voice strong and clear. My name is Dorothy Chen. In 1962, I was arrested for trying to enter this very courthouse to register to vote. The officer who arrested me broke my arm. He was never charged, never disciplined. He went on to have a 30-year career, retired with full honors. Dorothy paused, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Today, watching you sit on that bench, watching that officer be held accountable. Your Honor, I've waited 60 years to see this day. Justice delayed, but finally, not denied. Diana stood and came down from the bench, something she rarely did. She took Dorothy's hands in hers, feeling the weight of history in that simple touch. Mrs. Chen, you and the others who came before, who fought when fighting seemed impossible. You're the reason I can sit on that bench. You're the reason this day was possible. As Diana finally left the courthouse that evening, she found the steps covered with flowers cards and signs of support. But one caught her eye in particular, a simple piece of cardboard with a child's handwriting. Thank you, Judge Washington, for showing us that nobody is above the law. She picked up the sign and carried it with her. Tomorrow she would be back on the bench presiding over other cases, continuing the work of justice. The bruises would fade, the media attention would move on to other stories, but something fundamental had changed. Walking to her car, Diana thought about Thompson beginning his first night in federal prison. She thought about the victims who had finally seen justice. She thought about Dorothy Chen and all the others who had never received justice, but had never stopped believing in its possibility. The system wasn't fixed. One case, no matter how high profile, couldn't undo centuries of injustice. But it was a crack in the wall. A precedent set, a message sent. And sometimes Diana reflected as she drove home through the Atlanta streets. Sometimes that's how change begins, not with a revolution, but with one person standing up and saying, "No more, not to me, not to anyone." Her phone buzzed with a text from her daughter in New York. "Saw the news, Mom. Proud of you. Proud to be your daughter. Stay strong." Diana smiled, the first genuine smile she'd managed in 2 weeks. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new cases, new opportunities for justice. But tonight, she would go home, pour herself a glass of wine, and allow herself to feel the weight of what had happened. The trauma, the triumph, and the truth that sometimes, just sometimes, justice could prevail. The case of United States v. Thompson would go on to become a landmark in civil rights law, cited in countless briefs and arguments. Law schools would teach it as a seminal moment in police accountability. But for Diana, it would always be more personal than that. It would be the morning she was forced to experience what so many others had endured, and the afternoon she was able to do something about it. As she pulled into her driveway, Diana noticed a patrol car parked across the street. For a moment, her heart rate spiked, a trauma response she suspected would last for a while. But then she recognized the officer behind the wheel. It was Officer Patricia Williams, one of the good ones who had been assigned to check on her periodically given the death threats. Officer Williams gave her a respectful nod, and Diana nodded back. Not all officers were Thompson. The system could be reformed, could be improved. It would take time, effort, and constant vigilance, but it was possible. Inside her home, Diana finally allowed herself to break down. The tears came in waves, tears of relief, of anger, of exhaustion, of a strange kind of victory. She cried for herself, for Jasmine Fuller, for Dorothy Chen, for all the unnamed victims who had never gotten their day in court. And when the tears finally stopped, she stood up, straightened her shoulders, and began preparing for tomorrow. Because the work of justice never ended. And as long as she sat on that bench, as long as she had the power to make a difference, she would continue to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves. The bruise on her face would fade, but the lesson would remain. Justice might be blind, but those who dispensed it couldn't afford to be. The weeks following Thompson's sentencing brought an unexpected storm of activity to Diana's life. The case had become a national flashpoint, with protests erupting in cities across America demanding police reform. Diana found herself at the center of a movement she hadn't asked to lead but couldn't abandon. 3 weeks after the sentencing, Diana was reviewing case files in her chambers when Maria knocked urgently. "Your Honor, there's been a development. Officers Martinez, Phillips, and Kowalski want to meet with you. Their attorneys are here." Diana set down her pen carefully. "That's highly irregular, Maria. We're in the middle of their trials." "I know, Your Honor, but they say it's urgent. They have information about something bigger." 20 minutes later, Diana found herself in an unusual meeting. The 3 officers sat across from her, their attorneys flanking them. Martinez looked particularly haggard, dark circles under his eyes, suggesting many sleepless nights. "Your Honor?" Martinez began, his voice trembling. "What Thompson did to you that morning, it wasn't random. It wasn't just his prejudice." Diana leaned forward slightly. "Explain." Martinez exchanged glances with his attorney, who nodded. "There's something systematic happening in our department. Thompson wasn't just a bad cop acting alone. He was part of something organized. They call themselves the Brotherhood." The room seemed to grow colder. Diana had suspected something like this during the trial preparation, but hearing it confirmed was different. "Go on." Phillips spoke up for the first time. "It started about 8 years ago. A group of officers who felt the department was getting too soft, too politically correct. They had their own rules, their own way of handling things, especially in certain neighborhoods." "Black neighborhoods," Diana stated flatly. "Yes," Phillips admitted. "They had quotas. Not official ones, but Brotherhood quotas. How many arrests, how many citations. And if you didn't meet them, if you didn't play along, your career was over. They'd make sure you got the worst assignments, no backup when you needed it, constant harassment. Kowalski added, Thompson was one of the leaders, but not the top. That morning when he arrested you, Judge Washington, he was showing off. There were other Brotherhood members watching. He was proving he wasn't going soft just because of the trial. Diana felt a chill run down her spine. He attacked me as a performance. In a way, yes, Martinez said miserably. He texted the group that morning, said he was going to handle a situation at the courthouse. We think some of them were recording from a distance. How many? Diana asked quietly. How many officers are involved? The three men looked at each other again. Finally, Martinez answered. At least 40 that we know of. Maybe more. They're in different precincts now, some have been promoted. Captain Reynolds is one of them. Deputy Chief Morrison, too. Diana stood abruptly, pacing to the window. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just about individual bad actors. It was about an entire shadow organization within the police force. Why are you telling me this now? She asked without turning around. Because Thompson's sentencing broke something, Phillips said. Seeing him get 15 years, seeing that even judges aren't safe from them, it made us realize how far this has gone. And honestly, Your Honor, we're scared. The Brotherhood doesn't take betrayal lightly. Diana turned back to face them. You want protection. We want to make a deal. Their lead attorney finally spoke. My clients will testify about the Brotherhood, provide names, dates, evidence. In exchange, they want reduced sentences and witness protection. That's not my decision alone, Diana said. This needs to go to the FBI, the Department of Justice. This is a RICO case now. Over the next several hours, Diana coordinated with federal authorities to secure the officers and begin what would become one of the largest police corruption investigations in American history. By that evening, FBI agents were executing search warrants across Atlanta. Diana was in her office late that night when her personal phone rang. The number was blocked. Judge Washington, a gravelly voice said when she answered. You should have left well enough alone. Who is this? Someone who's been watching. Thompson was an idiot, but he was our idiot. You've started something you can't finish. Is that a threat? It's a promise. You think you're safe because you're a federal judge. You think that robe protects you. Ask yourself this. Your Honor, how many of us drive past your house every night? How many of us know where your daughter works in New York? The line went dead. Diana's hands shook as she immediately called FBI Special Agent Rachel Torres, who had been assigned to the Brotherhood investigation. They threatened my daughter, Diana said without preamble. We're on it, Torres replied. I'm sending agents to New York now, and we're increasing your security detail. Judge Washington, this confirms what we suspected. This goes deep. The next morning, Diana arrived at the courthouse to find it surrounded by federal agents. Metal detectors had been doubled and every officer entering was being subjected to additional screening. The atmosphere was tense, suspicious, poisonous. In her chambers, Diana found Chief Judge William Patterson waiting for her. Diana, he said gravely, the judicial conference is meeting this afternoon. This situation has become a crisis for the entire federal judiciary. We've never had a sitting judge directly threatened by an organized group within law enforcement. What are you suggesting, Bill? Patterson hesitated. Some members think you should recuse yourself from all police-related cases, for your safety and for the appearance of impartiality. Diana felt anger rise in her chest. So they win, they threaten me, and I retreat. No one's saying retreat. But Diana, you're a target now. Every defendant who comes before you will know what happened. Every police officer who testifies will be second-guessed. The defense bar is already filing motions claiming you can't be impartial. And if I step back, what message does that send? Diana countered. That if you threaten a judge effectively enough, you can choose who presides over your case. Before Patterson could respond, Maria burst in. Your Honor, emergency in courtroom 7. Officers Phillips and Kowalski were being transported for their hearing, and there was an incident. Diana and Patterson rushed to the courtroom to find chaos. Phillips was on a stretcher, blood covering his orange jumpsuit. Kowalski was being held separately, visibly shaken. FBI agent Torres met them at the door. Another inmate attacked Phillips in the transport van, stabbed him 6 times. He's alive but critical. How? Diana demanded. They were supposed to be in protective custody. The inmate was planted, Torres said grimly. He was arrested last night on fake charges specifically to be in that van. Judge Washington, the Brotherhood has people everywhere. Guards, administrators, even in the FBI. We don't know who we can trust. That afternoon, Diana made a decision that would define the rest of her career. Standing before an emergency assembly of the federal judiciary, law enforcement officials, and media, she declared war on the Brotherhood. What we're facing, she said, her voice carrying across the packed auditorium, is not just corruption, it's terrorism. It's an organization that uses violence and intimidation to subvert justice. And we will not allow them to succeed. She looked directly at the cameras. To the members of this so-called Brotherhood, let me be clear. Every resource of the federal government will be brought to bear against you. Every crime you've committed, every citizen you've brutalized, every oath you've broken will be exposed and prosecuted. And to my fellow judges, prosecutors, and legitimate law enforcement officers, we cannot let fear dictate our response. Yes, I was threatened. Yes, they know where I live, where my family works. But if we retreat now, if we let them intimidate us into silence, then the rule of law means nothing. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, 17 more officers had come forward offering to testify about the Brotherhood in exchange for protection. The Attorney General announced a joint task force between the FBI, DEA, and ATF to root out the organization. But the Brotherhood responded too. That night, Diana was under heavy guard at a federal safe house when news broke that 3 witnesses had been found dead in their cells, apparent suicides that no one believed were self-inflicted. A federal prosecutor's house was firebombed, though thankfully the family wasn't home. And most chillingly, a package was delivered to Diana's daughter's apartment in New York, containing photos of her taken over the previous week, along with a single word, "Stop." Diana's daughter Keisha called her in tears. "Mom, these photos, they were taken inside my office building at my gym, outside Marcus's apartment. They've been following me everywhere. Baby, listen to me," Diana said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Federal marshals are already on their way to you. You're going to be safe. We're going to get through this." "Mom, maybe you should stop. Maybe it's not worth—" "Keisha." Diana interrupted gently but firmly. "They want us to be afraid. They want us to give up. But if we do, how many more people will suffer? How many more George Floyds, Breonna Taylors, Ahmaud Arbery's? This isn't just about us anymore." The next morning brought a breakthrough. Martinez, who had been in solitary confinement for his protection, had managed to preserve something crucial, a hard drive containing years of Brotherhood communications videos and documentation of their crimes. "I've been collecting evidence for 2 years," Martinez told Diana and the federal prosecutors in a secure location. "I knew eventually someone would have to stop them. I just didn't have the courage to do it myself until now." The hard drive was a goldmine. It contained videos of Brotherhood members planning assaults, discussing how to plant evidence, coordinating false testimonies. There were spreadsheets tracking arrests by race with bonuses paid for meeting certain quotas. Most damning was a video of Deputy Chief Morrison himself instructing new Brotherhood members on how to justify use of force after the fact. "Always say they reached for their waistband," Morrison said in the video. "Judges eat that up. Fear for your life, sudden movement, possible weapon. Those are your magic words." Diana watched the video with a mixture of vindication and horror. How many cases had she presided over where those exact words were used? How many times had she given officers the benefit of the doubt Agent Torres was coordinating simultaneous raids across 3 states? Judge Washington, we're going to need you to sign about 40 warrants in the next hour. Diana reviewed each warrant carefully, but quickly. The evidence from Martinez's hard drive provided probable cause for arrests ranging from simple assault to murder. Several officers were implicated in the death of a homeless man 2 years earlier, a case that had been ruled justified use of force, but was clearly, from the Brotherhood's own videos, a murder. As Diana signed the last warrant, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You've killed us all. Martinez won't live to testify. Neither will you." She showed it to Torres, who immediately traced the number to a burner phone that had been activated near the courthouse. "They're getting desperate," Torres said. "Desperate people make mistakes." That afternoon, as federal agents executed the warrants, Atlanta exploded. Not in protests this time, but in support. Citizens who had long suspected what was happening finally had validation. Families who had lost loved ones to police violence and been told it was justified finally had hope for real justice. Diana watched from her secure location as Deputy Chief Morrison was arrested on live television, dragged from his office in handcuffs while shouting about a conspiracy against law enforcement. Captain Reynolds tried to flee, but was caught at the airport attempting to board a flight to Mexico. But the most shocking arrest was Judge Thomas Brennan from the State Superior Court. The Brotherhood's reach had extended into the judiciary itself. Brennan had been dismissing cases against Brotherhood members, reducing sentences, and providing inside information about investigations. Diana knew Brennan. They'd served on panels together, had discussed legal philosophy over coffee. The betrayal felt personal. That evening, Chief Judge Patterson called Diana. "The Judicial Conference has made a decision. You're being assigned exclusively to Brotherhood-related cases, all of them. They want one judge overseeing this to ensure consistency and security." "Bill, that could be hundreds of cases." "It could be." "Diana, you started this. You're the only one they trust to finish it. The only judge we're certain isn't compromised." Diana understood the weight of what was being asked. She would become the face of the prosecution of the Brotherhood, making her an even bigger target. But she also understood she had no choice. This was bigger than her now. The next weeks were a blur of hearings, arraignments, and bail decisions. Diana presided over them all from a secure courtroom that had been specially retrofitted with bulletproof glass and additional security measures. Every defendant was strip-searched. Every spectator was screened multiple times. The Brotherhood's attorneys tried everything. They filed motions claiming Diana was biased, that her assault by Thompson made her unable to be impartial. They claimed the evidence was obtained illegally, that Martinez was unreliable, that the videos were deepfakes. Diana methodically rejected each challenge, writing detailed opinions that would withstand appellate scrutiny. She was creating a record, building a foundation that would ensure these prosecutions couldn't be overturned on technicalities. One morning, she was presiding over the arraignment of Captain Reynolds when he suddenly stood up, ignoring his attorney's attempts to stop him. "Your Honor," Reynolds said, his voice carrying across the courtroom, "I want to make a deal." The prosecutor and defense attorney both looked stunned. Reynolds continued, "I know where the bodies are buried. Literally. There are 3 cases from the past 5 years where Brotherhood members killed suspects and made them disappear. I know where they are, I know who did it, and I know who ordered it." The courtroom erupted. Diana gavelled for order, then cleared the courtroom except for essential personnel. "Captain Reynolds," Diana said carefully, "you're represented by counsel. Are you certain you want to make these statements?" "Your Honor, my counsel is Brotherhood. Half the defense bar is. I don't trust anyone except you. You're the only one they couldn't buy or intimidate." Reynolds' information led to the discovery of 3 bodies buried in a remote area outside Atlanta. All 3 were young black men who had been reported missing after encounters with police. All 3 had been listed as runaways or voluntary disappearances. The discoveries changed everything. This was no longer just about civil rights violations or police brutality. This was about murder, organized crime, and conspiracy at a level that shocked even hardened federal investigators. Diana presided over the hearings, where the three families were officially notified that their sons had been found. She watched mothers collapse in grief and relief, fathers rage against a system that had failed their children so completely. "My boy was 18. One mother, Sandra Williams, said through tears. 18 years old. They told me he ran away, that he was probably involved with drugs. But I knew my boy. He was going to start community college. He had a girlfriend. He had plans." The Brotherhood tried one more desperate move. They leaked selectively edited videos trying to make it appear that Diana had been intoxicated during a judicial conference years earlier, that she had made biased statements against police. The videos were quickly debunked, but the damage to her reputation was real. Then came the night that changed everything again. Diana was being driven to a new safe house when her convoy was ambushed. 3 SUVs boxed in her vehicle, and armed men emerged. But they had underestimated the federal response. Within seconds, a helicopter appeared overhead, and tactical teams that had been following at a distance moved in. The gunfight lasted less than 2 minutes, but it felt like hours to Diana crouched in the back seat of an armored vehicle while bullets struck the windows. When it was over, 4 Brotherhood members were dead, 3 were in custody, and the conspiracy had moved from courtroom to battlefield. The attempted assassination was the Brotherhood's death knell. Public opinion, which had been divided, now united against them. Even police unions distanced themselves, recognizing that the Brotherhood represented everything wrong with law enforcement. Diana returned to court the next day against all security advice to continue the hearings. "They wanted me dead," she said from the bench, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what had happened. "They failed. Justice continues." One by one, the Brotherhood members began to break. Faced with murder charges, RICO predicates, and the possibility of life in prison, they turned on each other. The organization that had terrorized Atlanta's black community for almost a decade crumbled in a matter of months. Martinez, despite the threats against him, testified for 5 days straight. He provided names, dates, locations, and methods. He described how the Brotherhood recruited, how they identified targets, how they covered up their crimes. His testimony was so detailed, so damning, that even the most skeptical observers couldn't deny the truth. "We were told we were warriors," Martinez said from the witness stand, his voice hollow. "That we were the thin blue line protecting society from chaos. But we were the chaos. We were the criminals. And Judge Washington, that morning when Thompson attacked you, I knew it had gone too far. I saw him hit you, and I thought, if we can do this to a judge in broad daylight, what can't we do?" The trials continued for months. Diana presided over every single one, maintaining scrupulous fairness, even as she dealt with her own trauma from the attack and the attempted assassination. She gave each defendant their full rights, allowed every legitimate defense, and ensured that the record was unimpeachable. In the end, 37 members of the Brotherhood were convicted on various charges. Sentences ranged from 5 years to life in prison. Deputy Chief Morrison received 40 years. Captain Reynolds, despite his cooperation, received 25. Judge Brennan was not only convicted but impeached and removed from office, the first judge in Georgia history to suffer that fate. The night after the last verdict was delivered, Diana sat in her chambers, finally allowing herself to feel the exhaustion she'd been holding at bay for months. Maria found her there, staring out the window at the city lights. "It's over," Maria said softly. "No," Diana replied. "This part is over. But the work continues." The Brotherhood was a symptom, not the disease. The disease is the belief that some people matter less than others, that a badge or a robe or a title gives you the right to destroy lives. She turned to Maria. "How many Brotherhoods are out there that we don't know about? How many Thomas Brennans are sitting on benches right now perverting justice? How many David Thompsons are putting on badges this morning ready to see red when they encounter certain people?" Maria didn't have an answer. A month later, Diana was asked to testify before Congress about police reform. She sat before the House Judiciary Committee, the bruise long faded from her face, but the memory still fresh. Distinguished members of the committee, she began. I sit before you as a federal judge who was assaulted by a police officer for the crime of walking while black. But more importantly, I sit before you as a representative of the thousands who have suffered the same fate without the protection of a federal judgeship. She looked at each committee member in turn. The Brotherhood was not an anomaly. It was an extreme manifestation of a culture that exists in too many police departments across this country. A culture that sees certain citizens as enemies rather than people to protect. A culture that rewards aggression over de-escalation, that protects bad actors over good cops, that prioritizes closing ranks over seeking justice. What would you recommend, Judge Washington? The committee chair asked. Transparency, Diana replied immediately. Every police department should be required to maintain public databases of complaints, use of force incidents, and officer discipline. Federal oversight for departments with patterns of violations. Mandatory de-escalation training. And most importantly, accountability. Real swift, certain accountability for officers who violate their oath. Some would say you're biased, given your experience. One committee member challenged. Diana met his gaze steadily. Sir, I was biased before Officer Thompson attacked me. I was biased in favor of law enforcement. I gave officers the benefit of the doubt. I accepted their testimony over civilian witnesses. My bias was the problem, not the solution. What happened to me opened my eyes to what so many have been trying to tell us for decades. The hearing continued for hours, with Diana providing detailed recommendations for reform, sharing evidence from the Brotherhood trials, and answering hostile questions from committee members who saw her as anti-police. I'm not anti-police, Diana said firmly in response to one particularly aggressive questioner. I'm anti-police brutality. I'm anti-corruption. I'm anti-brotherhood. The good officers, the ones who truly protect and serve, they should want these reforms more than anyone. Because the brotherhoods of the world make their jobs harder and more dangerous. As Diana left the Capitol that day, she was met by a crowd of supporters, many holding signs with her now famous quote from the first day of Thompson's trial. Justice shouldn't depend on the victim's status or power. Among the crowd, Diana spotted a familiar face, Jasmine Fuller, the young woman who had been assaulted by Thompson 2 years before Diana. Judge Washington, Jasmine called out, making her way forward. I wanted to thank you. Because of you, I filed a civil suit. Because of you, I got justice. Not just money, but acknowledgement that what happened to me was wrong. Diana embraced her, feeling the weight of all they'd been through. That evening, Diana returned to her chambers to find a package waiting for her. For a moment, her blood ran cold, remembering the photos sent to her daughter. But this package was different. Inside was a simple wooden gavel, handmade with an inscription, from the officers who still believe in justice. Thank you for showing us the way back. There was no signature, but there was a note, we are the ones who joined to make a difference. The Brotherhood made us afraid to stand up. You showed us that fear is not an excuse. We're cleaning house now. It won't be easy, but we're trying. Diana held the gavel, feeling its weight. Change was possible. It was slow, it was dangerous, it was exhausting, but it was possible. As she prepared to leave for the day, her phone rang. It was her daughter, Keisha. Mom, I've been accepted to law school, Keisha said, her voice bright with excitement. After everything that happened after seeing you fight, I realized I want to be part of the solution too. Diana felt tears spring to her eyes. Baby, that's wonderful, but you know it won't be easy. I know, Keisha replied. You taught me that the right thing is rarely easy, but it's always worth doing. After they hung up, Diana stood in her chambers looking out at the city. The Brotherhood was broken, but the work was far from over. Tomorrow would bring new cases, new challenges, new opportunities to bend the arc of justice. But tonight, For just a moment, she allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt in months: hope. Hope that her granddaughter might grow up in a world where walking while black wouldn't be a crime. Hope that future Judge Washingtons wouldn't need federal protection to do their jobs. Hope that one day justice truly would be blind to everything except the truth. The sun was setting over Atlanta, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. Diana gathered her things, nodded to her security detail, and headed home. Tomorrow court would be in session again. Tomorrow the work would continue. But tonight, she had won. Not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever stood where she stood that morning on the courthouse steps facing power without protection, demanding justice despite the cost. The brotherhood was finished. But the sisterhood and brotherhood of those who believed in true justice, that was just beginning. And Diana Washington would be there, gavel in hand, ready to ensure that justice, real justice, would prevail. As she drove through the city streets, Diana passed the courthouse where it had all begun. The steps where Thompson had attacked her were now covered with the memorial flowers, photos, and messages from citizens thanking her for her courage. Someone had spray-painted a message on the sidewalk: "Judge Washington stood here and changed everything." Diana smiled a real smile for the first time in months. She hadn't changed everything, but she had changed something. And sometimes that was enough to start a revolution. The revolution Diana had inadvertently started spread far beyond Atlanta. 6 months after the Brotherhood trials concluded, she received a call that would test everything she had fought for. The president was on the line. "Judge Washington." The president's voice carried the weight of his office. "I need you in Washington, not the city but the position. I'm nominating you to the Supreme Court." Diana sat in stunned silence for a moment, her hand gripping the phone. Outside her office window, Atlanta sprawled beneath gray winter clouds, the city where she had built her career, where she had nearly died for justice. "Mr. President, I'm honored, but—" "There are no buts, Judge Washington. After what you've been through, what you've accomplished, the country needs your voice on the highest court. The Senate has already indicated bipartisan support. This could be a swift confirmation. May I have time to consider this? 24 hours, then we announce." That evening, Diana walked through her house, touching familiar objects as if seeing them for the first time. The wooden gavel from the reformed officer sat on her mantel. Photos of Keisha's law school orientation covered the refrigerator. In her study, boxes of case files from the Brotherhood trials served as a monument to how far they'd come. Her phone rang. It was Dorothy Chen, the elderly woman who had been arrested trying to register to vote in 1962. "Judge Washington, I heard rumors. Is it true the Supreme Court?" "How did you—" Diana began, then laughed softly. "I should know better than to underestimate you, Mrs. Chen. Child, you have to accept. You have to. For all of us who never got justice, for all the young ones who need to see that a black woman can sit on that court and dispense true justice." After the call, Diana sat in her study, remembering that morning on the courthouse steps when Thompson's fist had connected with her face. She touched her cheek unconsciously, though the physical evidence had long since healed. The psychological scars were different. She still flinched when police sirens wailed. She still checked her rearview mirror, obsessively looking for threats that usually weren't there. But those scars had become something else too, a reminder of why the fight mattered, of how personal justice truly was for millions of Americans who face the Thomas Thompsons of the world every day. The next morning, Diana called the president. "I accept." The announcement sent shockwaves through the legal community. Conservative commentators immediately attacked her as a radical activist judge, while progressive voices hailed her as a champion of civil rights. Diana ignored both extremes, focusing instead on preparing for what promised to be brutal confirmation hearings. 3 weeks into preparation, while reviewing constitutional precedents in her office, Maria burst in with a panicked expression. "Your Honor, we have a problem. Someone leaked sealed documents from the Brotherhood trials, documents that were supposed to remain classified for national security reasons." Diana's blood ran cold. Those documents contained information about Brotherhood members who had turned state's evidence witnesses in protective custody, ongoing investigations into other police departments. Who? Diana demanded. We don't know yet, but the documents are all over the internet. 3 witnesses have already received death threats. 1 is missing. FBI agent Torres arrived within the hour, her face grim. Judge Washington, this is a coordinated attack. Someone with high-level access did this. Someone who wants to derail your confirmation and destroy the cases against remaining Brotherhood members. How many people had access to those documents? Fewer than 10. We're investigating all of them, including... Torres hesitated. Including members of your own staff. The betrayal felt like a physical blow. Diana looked at Maria, who appeared equally shocked. They had been through everything together, trusted each other completely. Now that trust was poisoned with suspicion. That afternoon, as Diana was reviewing security footage with Torres, her phone rang. The voice on the other end was disguised with a voice modulator. Judge Washington, or should I say, Justice Washington. That has a nice ring to it, doesn't it? Who is this? Someone who knows the truth about you. Someone who has more documents, more secrets. Did you really think you could ascend to the Supreme Court without paying for what you did to the Brotherhood? The Brotherhood destroyed itself with its own corruption. The Brotherhood was protecting society from animals. You let the animals out of their cages. Every crime committed by someone who should have been in jail, that's on you. The line went dead. Torres was already tracing the call, but Diana knew they would find another burner phone, another dead end. That night, alone in her heavily guarded home, Diana received an encrypted email. The subject line read, "I know who leaked the documents." The sender identified themselves only as Patriot. The email contained a single paragraph. Check Margaret Harrison's bank accounts. Offshore deposits totaling $500,000 in the past month. She's been selling information to the highest bidder. Your trusted clerk is a snake. Margaret Harrison. Diana felt the floor shift beneath her. Margaret had been with her for 5 years, had helped prepare every Brotherhood case, had access to everything. Sweet, dedicated Margaret, who brought homemade cookies to the office and remembered everyone's birthdays. The next morning, Diana made the hardest call of her career, asking Torres to investigate Margaret. Within hours, the FBI had confirmed the offshore accounts. Margaret was arrested at her apartment, trying to destroy hard drives that contained gigabytes of classified documents. In the interrogation room, watched through one-way glass by Diana and Torres, Margaret finally broke. "They said they'd kill my son." Margaret sobbed. "He got mixed up with drugs, owed money to the wrong people. They said they'd make him disappear unless I helped them." "I'm so sorry, Judge Washington. I never wanted to hurt you." "Who are they?" Torres pressed. "I don't know. They contacted me through encrypted channels. Professional, organized. They knew everything about my son, about my financial problems, about my mother's medical bills. They said they were patriots trying to stop a radical from reaching the Supreme Court." Diana turned away from the glass, unable to watch anymore. Another life destroyed by the machinery of hate and revenge that the Brotherhood had set in motion. The leak scandal dominated the news cycle for days. Diana's confirmation hearings were postponed as the Senate Judiciary Committee investigated the security breach. Conservative senators used the scandal to question Diana's judgment, her ability to maintain security, her fitness for the Supreme Court. Senator Richard Hawkins, a fierce opponent of her nomination, was particularly vicious during a preliminary hearing. "Judge Washington, how can the American people trust you with the nation's highest secrets when you couldn't even protect documents in your own chambers?" Diana met his gaze steadily. "Senator Hawkins, I trusted someone who betrayed that trust under duress. Her son's life was threatened. Unless you're suggesting that I should have anticipated that a terrorist organization would target my staff's families, I'm not sure what your point is." "My point, Judge, is that you seem to attract violence and chaos wherever you go." "No, Senator. I expose violence and chaos that already exists. There's a difference between causing a problem and revealing it. The hearing continued for 6 grueling hours. Diana answered questions about her judicial philosophy, her views on constitutional interpretation, her handling of the Brotherhood cases. But every question came back to the same theme. Was she too controversial, too divisive for the Supreme Court? That evening, exhausted and demoralized, Diana was leaving the Senate building when she encountered an unexpected ally. Senator Elizabeth Chen, Dorothy Chen's granddaughter, was waiting by her car. Judge Washington, I wanted you to know that you have more support than you might think. 12 senators who publicly remain uncommitted have privately told me they'll vote to confirm. They're just waiting for the right moment to announce. Why are you telling me this? Because my grandmother called me. She said, and I quote, "If you let them do to Diana Washington what they did to me in 1962, I will haunt you for the rest of your life." Diana laughed, the first genuine laugh she'd had in weeks. The confirmation hearings resumed 2 weeks later. Diana walked into the Senate chamber wearing a simple black suit, her head held high. The room was packed with supporters and detractors, media and activists. She spotted Jasmine Fuller in the gallery, now a first-year law student. Keisha was there too, having flown in from New York. Senator Patricia Williams, the committee chair, began the proceedings. Judge Washington, before we begin, do you have any opening statement? Diana leaned toward the microphone. Senators, I come before you not as a perfect nominee, but as someone who has seen our justice system from every angle. I've seen it fail, and I've seen it triumph. I've been its victim and its instrument. That experience, painful as it has been, has given me a unique perspective on what justice means in America. She paused, looking at each senator in turn. You will ask me about my judicial philosophy, and I will tell you this. I believe the Constitution is a living document that must be interpreted through the lens of justice, equality, and human dignity. I believe that the law without compassion is tyranny, but compassion without law is chaos. I believe that every person who comes before the court, regardless of their race, religion, or status, deserves to be seen, heard, and treated fairly. Some of you will vote against me because you believe I'm too controversial, too scarred by my experiences to be impartial. To you, I say this. Show me a black woman in America who hasn't been scarred by injustice, and I'll show you someone who hasn't been paying attention. My scars don't make me biased. They make me aware. The room was silent for a moment before Senator Hawkins cleared his throat. Judge Washington, let's discuss your statement that the Constitution is a living document. Doesn't that suggest you would legislate from the bench? No, Senator. It suggests that I understand the founders could not have anticipated every situation we would face centuries later. They gave us principles, not prescriptions. Our job is to apply those principles to modern circumstances while remaining faithful to their core meaning. And what about the Second Amendment? The Second Amendment, like all amendments, must be balanced against other constitutional rights and public safety. The founders who wrote well-regulated militia could not have imagined assault weapons capable of killing dozens in seconds. That doesn't mean we ignore the amendment, but it does mean we interpret it thoughtfully. The questioning continued for hours, covering everything from abortion rights to corporate regulation, from executive power to criminal justice reform. Diana answered each question carefully, but honestly, refusing to be pinned down on how she would rule on hypothetical cases, but clear about her principles. On the third day of hearings, a surprise witness was called Officer David Thompson, appearing via video link from federal prison. Mr. Thompson, Senator Williams began, "You're the officer who assaulted Judge Washington. Why did you request to testify?" Thompson, wearing his orange jumpsuit, looking gaunt and aged, spoke slowly. "Because I need to say something. I've had a lot of time to think in here. About what I did, about who I was. Judge Washington could have destroyed me completely. She had every right to. Instead, she made sure I got a fair trial. She treated me with more dignity than I ever showed anyone." He paused, seeming to gather his courage. I was raised to believe that people like Judge Washington were the enemy, that they were trying to destroy our way of life. But sitting in that courtroom watching her preside over my case and others, I realized she wasn't trying to destroy anything. She was trying to build something better, something fair. Senator Hawkins interrupted. "Mr. Thompson, are you suggesting that your assault on Judge Washington was justified because—" "No," Thompson said forcefully. "Nothing justifies what I did. I'm saying that Judge Washington showed me what real justice looks like. Not vengeance, not bias, but actual justice. If someone like her who has every reason to hate people like me can be fair, then maybe there's hope for this country after all." The testimony sent ripples through the chamber. Here was the man who had brutalized Diana now advocating for her confirmation. It was unprecedented. That afternoon, more witnesses appeared. Dorothy Chen, now 91, was wheeled in, her voice still strong, as she testified about watching Diana transform pain into purpose. Jasmine Fuller spoke about how Diana's courage had inspired her to pursue law. Even Martinez, under heavy guard, testified via video about Diana's unwavering commitment to due process, even for those who had threatened her life. But the most powerful testimony came from an unexpected source, Judge Thomas Brennan, the corrupted judge who had been part of the Brotherhood, now serving his own sentence. "I sat on the bench for 15 years. Brennan said, his voice heavy with shame. "I thought I was dispensing justice, but I was perpetuating injustice. Judge Washington exposed that. She showed me what I had become. If you confirm her to the Supreme Court, you'll be putting someone there who understands both the nobility and the corruption that can exist in our system. Someone who won't be fooled by either." As the hearings drew to a close, Diana knew the vote would be close. The leaked documents scandal had hurt her, as had the constant drumbeat of criticism from conservative media. But she had answered every question, faced every accusation, and maintained her dignity throughout. The night before the committee vote, Diana couldn't sleep. She stood at her hotel window looking out at the lights of Washington, D.C., thinking about the journey that had brought her here. From that morning on, the courthouse steps to this moment, standing on the precipice of history. Her phone buzzed with a text from Keisha. "Mom, whatever happens tomorrow, you've already won. You've shown every little black girl in America that we can stand up to bullies, even when those bullies wear badges or sit in the Senate. I love you." The committee vote was scheduled for 10 a.m. Diana arrived early, finding the hallway outside the hearing room packed with supporters. They held signs reading, "Justice for Justice Washington," and "Confirm Diana." But there were protesters too, calling her a radical, a threat to law and order. Inside the hearing room, Senator Williams called for the vote. One by one, the senators announced their positions. It came down to Senator Michael Torres from Arizona, a moderate Republican who had remained uncommitted throughout the hearings. "This has been one of the most difficult decisions of my career," Senator Torres began. "Judge Washington and I disagree on many issues. Her judicial philosophy is more expansive than mine. Her interpretation of constitutional rights broader than I might prefer." Diana's heart sank. This sounded like a rejection. "However," Torres continued, "I cannot ignore the courage she has shown, the fairness she has demonstrated, even toward those who tried to destroy her, and the unique perspective she would bring to the Supreme Court. We need justices who have been tested by fire and emerged with their principles intact. Judge Washington is such a person. I vote yes." The room erupted. The committee had voted 11 to 10 to send her nomination to the full Senate. It was the narrowest possible margin, but it was enough. The full Senate vote was scheduled for the following week. Those 7 days were a whirlwind of lobbying, arm-twisting, and political maneuvering. Diana stayed above the fray, continuing to prepare for the possibility of joining the court while also maintaining her duties as a federal judge. 3 days before the vote, another crisis emerged. A video surfaced, apparently showing Diana at a Black Lives Matter protest years earlier chanting, "No justice, no peace." Conservative senators pounced, claiming this proved she was a radical activist. Diana responded with a simple statement. "Yes, I attended that protest. It was after the death of Philando Castile, shot in his car in front of his girlfriend and her 4-year-old daughter. I attended as a private citizen exercising my First Amendment rights. If believing that Black Lives Matter disqualifies me from the Supreme Court, then the problem isn't with me, it's with the court. The statement was risky, but it was honest. And surprisingly, it seemed to resonate. Polls showed public support for her confirmation, increasing especially among young people and minorities, who saw her as someone who would represent their interests on the court. The day of the Senate vote arrived gray and drizzly, much like the day Thompson had attacked her. Diana watched from her office as senators gave their floor speeches, some praising her courage and qualifications, others warning of the danger she posed to traditional values and law enforcement. Senator Hawkins was particularly dramatic. If we confirm Diana Washington, we are telling every police officer in America that we don't value their service, that we see them as the enemy. Senator Chen responded immediately. If we don't confirm Diana Washington, we are telling every victim of police brutality that their suffering doesn't matter, that justice is only for those with power and privilege. The vote was called at 3 p.m. Diana stood in her chambers, Maria and Keisha beside her watching on television as the clerk called the roll. Mr. Anderson. No. Ms. Chen. Yes. Mr. Davis. Yes. Mr. Hawkins. No. On and on it went. Each vote tallied, the count seesawing back and forth. With 99 senators having voted, it stood at 50-49 in favor. The final vote belonged to Senator James Crawford from Maine, another moderate Republican who had remained uncommitted. Mr. Crawford. There was a long pause. The entire chamber seemed to hold its breath. Yes. Diana's knees nearly buckled. Maria screamed. Keisha wrapped her arms around her mother. She had done it. 51-49. The narrowest confirmation in Supreme Court history, but a confirmation nonetheless. As the final tally was announced, Diana's phone exploded with calls and messages. The president was first. Congratulations, Justice Washington. You've earned this. But the call that meant the most came an hour later. It was Dorothy Chen, her voice thick with tears. Child, you did it. You actually did it. A Black woman on the Supreme Court. I never thought I'd live to see this day. We did it, Mrs. Chen. All of us who refused to give up, who kept fighting even when it seemed hopeless. We did it together. That evening, Diana stood once again at a window, this time in her judicial chambers, looking out at Atlanta one last time as a circuit judge. Tomorrow she would fly to Washington for her swearing in. Tomorrow she would become Justice Washington. But tonight, she allowed herself to remember everything that had brought her here. The blow from Thompson's hand, the handcuffs cutting into her wrists, the death threats, the attempted assassination, the betrayals and the allies, the victims who had found their voices and the perpetrators who had found their consciences. She thought about the brotherhood now dismantled but not destroyed. There would always be those who believed that might made right, that a badge or a title gave them the authority to oppress others. But now there would be a voice on the highest court in the land who had faced that oppression and survived it. Her phone rang one more time. It was Thompson calling from prison. Justice Washington, I wanted to congratulate you and to tell you something. What's that, Mr. Thompson? I'm teaching literacy classes here, to other inmates. Most of them are Black men. I might have arrested back in my brotherhood days. I'm trying to, balance the scales a little. That's a start, Mr. Thompson. It doesn't make up for what I did. No, it doesn't, but it's a start. After the call, Diana began packing her office. The wooden gavel from the reformed officers would come with her to the Supreme Court. So would the photos of Keisha, the letters from supporters, and a new addition, a photo from that morning on the courthouse steps, a reminder of how one moment of injustice had led to this moment of triumph. As she placed the items in boxes, Diana thought about the cases she would hear on the Supreme Court. Abortion rights, voting rights, criminal justice reform, executive power issues that would shape America for generations. She would be one of 9 voices, but hers would be a voice that had been silenced, and then amplified, broken, and then rebuilt. Maria knocked and entered one last time as her clerk. "Your Honor, I mean Justice Washington, your security detail is ready to take you home." "Thank you, Maria, for everything, for standing by me through all of this." "It's been an honor, Justice Washington. Will you need a clerk at the Supreme Court?" Diana smiled. "I'll need 4 clerks, actually, and I know just who I want for the first one." As they walked out together, Diana passed the courtroom where she had presided over the Brotherhood trials. The doors were closed, the room dark, but she could still feel the weight of what had happened there. Justice had been served imperfectly, perhaps, but served nonetheless. Outside, protesters and supporters still gathered their chants, mixing in the night air. "Justice Washington, save our rights," competed with "Washington will destroy the court." Diana ignored both groups, walking steadily to her car. She had learned that justice wasn't about popularity, or even about being right all the time. It was about showing up day after day and trying to balance the scales that history had tilted. As the car pulled away, Diana saw a young black girl, maybe 10 years old, pressed against the security barrier, holding a handmade sign that read, "When I grow up, I want to be like Justice Washington." Diana had the driver stop. She got out, walked over to the girl, and knelt down despite the protests of her security detail. "What's your name?" Diana asked. "Aisha," the girl replied, suddenly shy. "Aisha, you don't want to be like me. You want to be better than me. You want to be yourself, but the best version of yourself. Can you promise me that?" The girl nodded solemnly. "Good. And Aisha, when things get hard, when people try to tear you down, or tell you that you don't belong, remember this: you are exactly where you're supposed to be. Your voice matters, your dreams matter, you matter." As Diana returned to her car, she heard Aisha's mother whisper, "Thank you, Justice Washington. Thank you for everything." The car pulled away into the Atlanta night, carrying Diana toward her future as a Supreme Court justice. Behind her, the city lights twinkled like stars, each one representing a story, a struggle, a hope for justice. Tomorrow would begin a new chapter. Tomorrow she would take an oath to uphold the Constitution, to dispense justice without fear or favor. It was the same oath she had taken as a federal judge, but now the stakes were higher, the responsibility greater. But tonight, Diana allowed herself one moment of pure, unbridled triumph. She had been knocked down literally and figuratively. She had been bloodied and bruised, threatened, and nearly killed. But she had risen. She had fought. She had won. And most importantly, she had shown that justice, real justice, was possible. Not perfect, not complete, but possible. And sometimes, in a world full of Thomas Thompsons and brotherhoods, possible was enough to keep fighting for. The morning of Diana's swearing-in dawned crisp and clear in Washington, D.C., a stark contrast to the turmoil of the past months. She stood before the mirror in her hotel suite, adjusting the black robe that would now carry the weight of the nation's highest court. Keisha stood behind her, helping with the collar. "Mom, are you ready for this?" Keisha asked softly. Diana met her daughter's eyes in the mirror. "I've been getting ready for this my whole life. I just didn't know it until Thompson's fist reminded me why it matters." The ceremony was scheduled for noon on the Supreme Court steps, a public event at Diana's insistence despite security concerns. The FBI had intercepted 3 credible threats in the past week alone, but Diana refused to be sworn in behind closed doors. "If I hide now," she had told Agent Torres, "then they win. Every racist, every corrupt cop, every person who believes I don't belong there wins. This moment isn't just mine. It belongs to everyone who's been told they don't belong." As her motorcade approached the Supreme Court building, Diana could see the massive crowd that had gathered. Supporters and protesters filled the streets held back by barriers, and an overwhelming police presence. The irony wasn't lost on her that she needed police protection from those who claimed to support police. Chief Justice Margaret Thornton waited at the top of the steps, holding the Bible that Diana had requested, the same one Frederick Douglass had owned on loan from the Smithsonian. As Diana climbed the marble steps, she thought she heard a familiar voice calling her name. She turned to see Thompson's former partner Martinez in civilian clothes, standing among the crowd of supporters. He caught her eye and placed his hand over his heart, a gesture of respect that nearly broke her composure. Martinez had testified against the Brotherhood at great personal cost, and seeing him here supporting her ascension felt like a circle closing. "Justice Washington," Chief Justice Thornton said as Diana reached the top. "Are you ready to take the oath?" Diana placed her hand on Douglass's Bible, feeling the weight of history beneath her palm. "I am." "Please repeat after me. I, Diana Washington, do solemnly swear. I, Diana Washington, do solemnly swear that I will administer justice without respect to persons." Diana's voice grew stronger with each phrase carrying across the crowd. "That I will administer justice without respect to persons, and do equal right to the poor and to the rich." As she repeated these words, Diana thought of all the poor who had stood before judges and received no justice, all the rich who had bought their way out of accountability, and that I will faithfully and impartially discharge and perform all the duties incumbent upon me as Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States. The crowd had grown silent, even the protesters pausing to witness history being made. "Under the Constitution and laws of the United States, so help me God. So help me God." The moment the oath was complete, the crowd erupted. Cheers and boos mingled in the air, but Diana heard something else too, a chant rising from the supporters. "Justice for all! Justice for all! Chief Justice!" Thornton leaned in close. "Welcome to the court, Justice Washington. God knows we need your perspective here." The first weeks on the Supreme Court were overwhelming. Diana had to adjust not just to the different pace and process, but to the weight of knowing that every decision she participated in would shape American law for decades. Her colleagues were cordial but cautious, unsure how this new justice who had literally fought her way to the bench would affect the court's dynamics. Justice Robert Brennan, the court's most conservative member, was particularly cold. During her first conference, when the justices met privately to discuss cases, he barely acknowledged her presence. Justice Elena Rodriguez, one of the liberal justices, pulled Diana aside afterward. "Don't take Brennan personally," Rodriguez said. "He opposed your nomination vocally. He thinks you're too affected by your experiences to be impartial." "Aren't we all affected by our experiences?" Diana responded. "The difference is, I acknowledge mine." 3 weeks into her tenure, the court heard arguments in a case that would test Diana immediately. Harrison versus City of Memphis, a challenge to qualified immunity for police officers accused of excessive force. The timing couldn't have been more pointed. Diana had recused herself from any cases involving the Brotherhood or the officers she had sentenced, but this case was different. It involved the broader principle of police accountability, the very issue that had defined her journey to the court. During oral arguments, the attorney for the police officers made a statement that sent chills down Diana's spine. "Your Honors, if we remove qualified immunity, every officer will be paralyzed by fear of litigation. They'll hesitate when they need to act, and citizens will be less safe." Diana leaned forward. "Counsel, isn't it possible that officers might simply be more careful about using force? Isn't hesitation before violence sometimes appropriate?" The attorney seemed taken aback by the directness of her question. "Justice Washington, in the heat of the moment, officers must make split-second decisions." "I'm familiar with split-second decisions." Diana interrupted unconsciously, touching her cheek where Thompson had struck her. "Officer Thompson made a split-second decision to strike me without provocation. Should he have been immune from consequences, because it was a quick decision?" The courtroom fell silent. Everyone knew her history, but hearing her reference it so directly was jarring. Justice Brennan interjected, Justice Washington, surely your personal experience, my personal experience, Diana said firmly, informs my understanding of the law's real-world implications. Just as Justice Marshall's experience with segregation informed his jurisprudence, or Justice Ginsburg's experience with gender discrimination informed hers. We don't leave our lives at the courthouse door, Justice Brennan. We bring them to bear on our understanding of justice. The exchange made headlines nationwide. New justice brings personal pain to police immunity debate. Read the New York Times. Conservative commentators accused her of being unable to separate her trauma from her judicial duties. That evening, alone in her new chambers, Diana received an unexpected visitor. Justice Anthony Kim considered the court's swing vote knocked on her door. "Diana, may I come in?" "Of course, Justice Kim." He sat down, seeming to choose his words carefully. "What you said today about bringing our experiences to bear, it resonated with me. My parents were interned during World War II. They were American citizens imprisoned because of how they looked. I've never spoken about it publicly, but it affects how I see every civil liberties case." "Why haven't you spoken about it?" "Because I was taught that to be taken seriously, to be seen as legitimate, I had to be invisible. I had to pretend that the law exists in a vacuum separate from the people it affects." He paused. "You're refusing to be invisible, and it's making some of our colleagues uncomfortable." "Good," Diana said simply. "Comfort and justice rarely coexist." The Harrison case deliberations were intense. The justices were split 4-4, with Diana holding the deciding vote. The pressure was immense, with both sides knowing this would define her early tenure on the court. In conference, Justice Brennan argued passionately for maintaining qualified immunity. "Without protection from frivolous lawsuits, law enforcement will collapse." Diana responded with equal passion. "With too much protection from legitimate lawsuits, law enforcement becomes lawless. I've seen it firsthand. The Brotherhood operated for years because they knew qualified immunity would shield them. How many brotherhoods are operating right now under the same assumption?" "That's an extreme example," Brennan started. "It's not extreme to the victims," Diana shot back. "Every abuse of power starts small, with the assumption that there won't be consequences. Qualified immunity as it exists now doesn't protect good cops doing their jobs. It protects bad cops abusing their power." Justice Rodriguez supported her position, as did the other liberal justices. Kim seemed torn, his usual decisive nature clouded by the weight of the decision. As the senior justice in the majority, if Diana's view prevailed, she would have the privilege of assigning who would write the opinion, including potentially herself. "I need more time," Kim finally said, an unusual admission from him. That night, Diana couldn't sleep. She walked the empty halls of the Supreme Court building, her footsteps echoing in the marble corridors. The portraits of past justices seemed to watch her, some who had advanced justice, others who had hindered it. She found herself in the court's library, surrounded by volumes of legal precedent, when she heard footsteps. Kim appeared looking equally restless. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked. "The ghosts are chatty tonight," Diana replied, gesturing to the portraits. Kim smiled slightly. "Diana, can I share something with you? When my parents were released from internment, they never sued. They never sought justice. They were told that pursuing legal action would mark them as troublemakers, would make things harder for other Japanese Americans. So they stayed silent." He paused, running his hand along the spine of a legal volume. "They died silent. They never got justice. And the Supreme Court decision that allowed their internment, Korematsu, stood as precedent for decades. Bad precedent that caused immeasurable harm." "What are you saying, Anthony?" "I'm saying that sometimes the court has to correct its course. Sometimes we have to acknowledge that what we've been doing is wrong, even if changing it is disruptive." The next morning, Kim announced his decision. He would vote to limit qualified immunity significantly. The vote was 5-4, with Diana writing the majority opinion. She spent 3 weeks crafting it, drawing not just on legal precedent, but on the real-world implications of unchecked police power. She wrote about the balance between protecting officers doing difficult jobs and protecting citizens from abuse. She cited Thompson's case, the Brotherhood trials, and dozens of other examples of qualified immunity being used to shield clear wrongdoing. The opening paragraph of her opinion would be quoted for generations. The shield of qualified immunity was meant to protect those who protect us. It has become a sword used against those it was meant to serve. When law enforcement officers violate the very laws they swear to uphold, they must face the same justice system as any other citizen. To hold otherwise is to create a class above the law, and history has shown us repeatedly where that leads. The decision sent shockwaves through law enforcement and legal communities. Police unions condemned it as a declaration of war on cops. Civil rights organizations hailed it as long overdue justice. But the reaction that mattered most to Diana came in a letter from Jasmine Fuller. Justice Washington, I just won my civil suit against the officers who assaulted me before Thompson got to you. Your opinion gave me the tool to finally get justice. Thank you for not forgetting us when you got to the top. 2 months later, Diana was working late in her chambers when Maria, who had indeed become her clerk at the Supreme Court, knocked urgently. Justice Washington, there's been an incident. Thompson was attacked in prison. He's in critical condition. Diana felt her blood run cold. Despite everything, she didn't wish violence on Thompson. He had shown genuine remorse, had testified on her behalf, was trying to make amends. What happened? Apparently some inmates found out he testified for your confirmation. They saw it as betrayal. He's been stabbed multiple times. Diana immediately called the federal prison warden. This is Justice Washington. I want David Thompson placed in protective custody immediately upon his recovery, and I want a full investigation into how this was allowed to happen. The warden was stammering. Justice Washington, I didn't expect. I mean, given your history. My history is exactly why I'm calling. Thompson is serving his sentence according to law. He has the right to serve it safely. Justice doesn't mean vengeance, warden. Make sure your staff understands that. Thompson survived barely. 3 weeks later, Diana received a letter from him written in shaky handwriting. Justice Washington, I heard what you did, making sure I was protected. After everything I did to you, you still made sure I was treated fairly. I don't understand it, but I'm grateful. I'm trying to be better. Teaching more classes, talking to young officers who visit about what not to become. It's not enough, will never be enough, but it's what I can do. Thank you for showing me what real justice looks like. Diana kept the letter in her desk drawer, a reminder of the complex nature of justice and redemption. As her first term on the court progressed, Diana found herself at the center of several landmark decisions. In Williams v. Georgia, she wrote a concurring opinion that expanded voting rights protections. In Chen v. United States, she was the deciding vote in a case involving immigrant detention conditions. Each decision was scrutinized, praised, and vilified in equal measure. But it was a case called Morrison v. Commonwealth of Virginia that would truly test her resolve. The case involved a black teenager, Marcus Morrison, who had been sentenced to life without parole for a crime committed when he was 15. The prosecutor in the case had withheld exculpatory evidence, and there were credible allegations of police coercion in obtaining his confession. During oral arguments, Virginia's Attorney General argued that procedural barriers prevented the court from reviewing the conviction. The defendant failed to raise these issues in state court within the required time frame, Your Honors. Procedural default bars federal review. Diana's voice cut through the formal atmosphere. Counsel, the defendant was 15, represented by an overworked public defender, who has since been disbarred for incompetence. Are you really arguing that this child should spend his life in prison because his incompetent lawyer missed a filing deadline? The law requires justice, Diana interrupted. At least that's what I thought when I took my oath. Or is justice only for those who can afford competent counsel? Justice Brennan shifted uncomfortably. Justice Washington, we must respect state procedural rules. Diana turned to him. Justice Brennan, with all due respect, we must respect human dignity and constitutional rights. If procedural rules trump actual innocence, then we're not a justice system, we're just a system. The deliberations were heated. Diana found herself in the minority initially, with even some liberal justices concerned about federal overreach into state criminal proceedings. But she persisted, circulating draft after draft of a dissent that she threatened would excoriate the court's elevation of procedure over justice, of technicality over truth. Justice Kim eventually switched his vote, as did Justice Rodriguez. "Diana's right," Rodriguez said in conference. "If we can't correct a clear injustice because of a procedural technicality, what are we doing here?" The 5-4 decision, ordering a new trial for Marcus Morrison, was controversial, but Diana's majority opinion would become required reading in law schools. The machinery of justice cannot become so obsessed with its own gears and wheels that it forgets its purpose to determine truth and deliver justice. When a 15-year-old child is railroaded into a life sentence based on a coerced confession and hidden evidence, procedural default rules must yield to the Constitution's fundamental guarantees. The decision led to Marcus Morrison's exoneration 6 months later. He had served 12 years for a crime he didn't commit. Diana attended his release, standing in the back of the crowd watching as he embraced his mother for the first time as a free adult. Marcus spotted her and approached hesitantly. "Justice Washington, I wanted to thank you. You saved my life." "No, Marcus. You saved your own life by never giving up. I just made sure the system finally listened." As her first year on the court drew to a close, Diana reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The physical scars from Thompson's attack had long since faded, but the psychological impact remained. She still flinched at sudden movements, still felt her heart race when she heard sirens, but she had transformed that trauma into purpose. One evening she was leaving the court building when she encountered a group of law students on a tour. One young black woman broke away from the group and approached her. "Justice Washington, I'm sorry to bother you, but I just wanted to say, I'm here because of you. When I saw you take that oath after everything you went through, I knew I wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to fight like you fight." Diana smiled, remembering another young girl with a similar dream. "What's your name?" "Aisha. Aisha Williams." Diana's breath caught. "From Atlanta. You had a sign at one of my appearances." The young woman's eyes widened. "You remember?" "I remember. You've grown up. I kept my promise," Aisha said, "to be the best version of myself. I'm at Georgetown Law now, top of my class." Diana felt tears prick her eyes. "Keep fighting, Aisha. The system needs voices like yours." As Aisha rejoined her group, Diana realized that this was the true victory. Not her seat on the court, not the landmark decisions, but the inspiration passed on to the next generation. The young Aishas and Keishas who would continue the fight for justice long after Diana was gone. That night, Diana sat in her study at home, reading briefs for the next day's arguments. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dorothy Chen, now 92, but still sharp as ever. "Saw the Morrison decision. You're doing what I always knew you would, child. Making justice real for those who need it most." Diana smiled, thinking of all the Dorothy Chens who had fought before her, all the Aisha Williamses who would fight after. The Brotherhood had tried to break her, to silence her, to kill her, but they had failed. They had only made her stronger, more determined, more committed to the principle that justice, true justice, belonged to everyone. Outside her window, Washington, D.C. hummed with life. Somewhere in the city, police officers were doing their jobs honorably. Somewhere else, citizens were standing up to abuse of power. The struggle continued as it always had, as it always would. But now, sitting on the highest court in the land, was someone who had been on both sides of that struggle. Someone who had felt the boot and worn the robe. Someone who understood that justice wasn't abstract or theoretical, but visceral and vital. Diana picked up her pen and continued reading, preparing for tomorrow's battles. The work was never done, but that was okay. She had fought too hard to get here to rest now. Thompson's attack had tried to deny her access to justice. Instead, it had given her the power to reshape it. As she worked late into the night, Diana thought of something Thompson had said in his letter. "You showed me what real justice looks like." He was wrong, she thought. She hadn't shown him what justice looked like. She had shown him what it looked like when justice refused to be denied. The lamplight cast long shadows across her desk, illuminating the papers that would shape tomorrow's arguments, next month's decisions, next year's precedents. Each shadow was a reminder of how far she'd come from that morning on the courthouse steps. Each page was a testament to the power of transformation, of turning pain into purpose, trauma into triumph. Somewhere in Atlanta, the courthouse where it had all happened, stood quiet in the darkness. The steps where Thompson had struck her had become a memorial, a reminder of what could happen when power went unchecked. But they were also a monument to resilience, to the idea that justice, though it might be delayed, denied, or attacked, could not be destroyed. Diana wrote until dawn, crafting arguments that would protect the vulnerable, challenge the powerful, and slowly, carefully bend the arc of justice toward its true purpose. She wrote with the knowledge that every word mattered, every decision counted. Every opinion could be the difference between oppression and liberation for someone somewhere who was standing where she had once stood. The sun rose over Washington, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Diana set down her pen, stretched her tired muscles, and prepared for another day on the bench. Another day of questions, arguments, and decisions. Another day of proving that a black woman who had been brutalized by the system could rise to reshape it. She thought of Thompson recovering in protective custody, trying to make amends. She thought of Martinez, who had risked everything to expose the truth. She thought of the Brotherhood, scattered and imprisoned, but not entirely gone, their ideology still lurking in dark corners of law enforcement. But mostly, she thought of the future. Of the cases yet to come, the injustices yet to be corrected, the rights yet to be protected. She had a lifetime appointment now, decades to make a difference. Thompson's fist had started something he never could have imagined. It had launched not just a legal career, but a legal revolution. Diana stood, straightened her robes, and headed to the Supreme Court. Justice was calling, and she had work to do. The court building felt different that morning as Diana entered through the justice's private entrance. 5 years had passed since her confirmation, 5 years of landmark decisions and bitter dissents, and today would bring perhaps the most consequential case of her tenure. Robinson v. United States challenged the entire framework of federal oversight for police departments with histories of civil rights violations. The implications were staggering. In the robing room, Diana encountered Justice Brennan, whose hostility had barely softened over the years. "Ready to dismantle law enforcement entirely today, Justice Washington?" he asked with barely concealed disdain. "Ready to ensure law enforcement serves all citizens equally?" "Justice Brennan," Diana replied calmly, fastening her robe. "As our oaths require." The oral arguments were scheduled to last 2 hours, but Diana knew the reverberations would last decades. As she took her seat on the bench, she noticed a familiar face in the gallery. David Thompson sat in the back row, his appearance dramatically changed from his days as an officer. Prison and remorse had aged him, but there was something else too, a clarity in his eyes that hadn't been there before. The case began with the Solicitor General arguing for expanded federal oversight. "Your Honors, the pattern of violations in police departments across this country demands robust federal intervention. Without it, we condemn countless citizens to systematic abuse." Justice Brennan immediately pushed back. "Isn't this a massive federal overreach? Where in the Constitution does it authorize the federal government to micromanage local police?" Diana leaned forward. "Where in the Constitution does it authorize local police to violate citizens' rights with impunity? The 14th Amendment seems quite clear about equal protection under law." The attorney for the police unions stood to make his argument, and Diana recognized him immediately. Richard Carver, the same lawyer who had defended Thompson years ago. Their eyes met briefly, a moment of shared history passing between them. "Your Honors," Carver began, "federal oversight has proven ineffective and costly. Police departments need flexibility to serve their communities, not bureaucratic interference from Washington." "Mr. Carver," Diana interjected, "you represented Officer Thompson in a case where a lack of oversight allowed a criminal organization to operate within the Atlanta Police Department for years. Are you now arguing that less oversight would have prevented that?" Carver shifted uncomfortably. "That was an extreme situation, Justice Washington." "Was it, how many brotherhoods are operating right now without detection because there's insufficient oversight?" Justice Kim joined in. "Mr. Carver, the evidence shows that departments under federal consent decrees show marked improvement in civil rights compliance. How do you explain that?" As the arguments continued, Diana noticed Thompson taking notes intently. After the session ended and the justices retired to their conference room, she made an unusual decision. She asked her clerk to invite Thompson to her chambers. 20 minutes later, Thompson sat across from her, the same desk where she had once reviewed his criminal file, now between them, like a bridge across time. "Why were you there today?" Diana asked directly. Thompson pulled out a worn notebook. "I'm writing a book, Justice Washington, about the Brotherhood, about what I did, about how systems of oppression operate within law enforcement. I wanted to hear the arguments to understand how the highest court sees these issues." "A book." "My counselor in prison, she said I needed to do more than apologize. I needed to document, to warn, to educate. Every dollar from the book will go to victims of police violence." He paused, seeming to gather courage. "I was hoping, would you be willing to write the foreword?" The request hung in the air between them, weighted with years of pain and an attempt at redemption. Diana studied the man who had attacked her, who had changed the trajectory of her life with his violence. "Send me the manuscript," she said finally. "I'll read it. No promises." Thompson nodded, understanding more was being offered than he deserved. "There's something else. The Brotherhood. It's not dead. There are new groups forming, learning from our mistakes, being more careful. They call themselves different names, but the ideology is the same." Diana felt a chill. "How do you know this?" "Because they've reached out to me. They want me to be their martyr, their symbol. They don't know I've been talking to the FBI, helping identify their recruitment tactics." After Thompson left, Diana sat alone in her chambers processing this information. The fight she thought had been won was merely in remission. Evil, she reflected, was adaptive. It learned, evolved, found new ways to manifest. The deliberations on Robinson v. United States were the most contentious Diana had experienced. The justices were split not just along ideological lines but on fundamental questions about federalism and the role of the courts in addressing systematic injustice. Justice Brennan argued vehemently against federal oversight. "This court is not a super legislature. We cannot remake policing in America from the bench." "We're not remaking it," Diana countered. "We're ensuring it complies with the Constitution. When local systems fail systematically to protect constitutional rights, federal intervention isn't overreach, it's obligation." Justice Rodriguez, usually an ally, expressed concern. "Diana, I agree with your principles, but the precedent this could set, giving federal authorities such broad oversight powers, it could be used for less noble purposes by future administrations." "Elena," Diana replied, using her colleague's first name deliberately. "The precedent of allowing systematic violations of civil rights to continue unchecked is far more dangerous. We've seen where that leads. I've felt where that leads." The reference to her own experience created an uncomfortable silence in the room. Diana rarely invoked her personal history during deliberations, but this case demanded it. Justice Kim broke the silence. "Perhaps there's a middle ground. We could establish strict criteria for federal intervention requiring documented patterns of abuse, failed local remedies, and judicial review." Diana spent the next 3 days crafting a potential majority opinion, incorporating Kim's suggestions. She worked 18-hour days, her clerks bringing meals she barely touched, as she wrote and rewrote, trying to build a framework that would protect civil rights without creating an unwieldy precedent. On the fourth day, Maria knocked urgently. "Justice Washington, there's been an incident. A police shooting in Chicago. An unarmed teenager. The officer involved, he's claiming Brotherhood connections, saying he was following their training." Diana felt her stomach drop. The Brotherhood's influence extending beyond Atlanta had always been a fear, but confirmation was devastating. She immediately called Agent Torres, now Deputy Director of the FBI. "Rachel, what can you tell me about Chicago?" "It's bad, Diana. We've identified at least 15 officers with Brotherhood connections or sympathies. They've been more careful than Atlanta, no official organization, just informal networks sharing tactics and ideology." "The Robinson decision," Diana said, understanding immediately. "They're trying to influence it to show what happens without strong police autonomy. Or they're showing what happens without federal oversight," Torres countered. "This could go either way in the public narrative." That evening, Diana did something she'd never done as a justice. She visited the family of the Chicago victim. Kendrick Williams was 17, had been walking home from basketball practice when Officer Mitchell Drake stopped him for suspicious behavior. The encounter escalated, and Kendrick was dead within 3 minutes. Kendrick's mother, Patricia Williams, sat in her living room surrounded by family and activists. When Diana entered the room, fell silent. "Justice Washington," Patricia said, her voice hollow with grief. "My baby is dead because he walked while black just like you did that morning, only he didn't have a federal judgeship to protect him." Diana sat beside her, taking her hands. "I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so deeply sorry." "Can you stop this?" Patricia asked desperately. "From your position, can you make this stop?" "I'm trying." Diana said, her voice thick with emotion. "The case we're deciding now, it could give us tools to prevent this. But Patricia, change is slow, too slow, for Kendrick, too slow for so many." An older woman in the corner spoke up. Diana recognized her as Diane Morrison, mother of Marcus Morrison, the teenager Diana had helped free years earlier. "Justice Washington helped my Marcus," Diane said. "She gave him back his life. She's fighting for all our children." But Patricia Williams wasn't consoled. "Fighting isn't enough when they keep dying. When does the fighting turn into winning?" Diana had no answer that would ease a mother's grief. Back in Washington, the Chicago shooting had indeed influenced the Robinson deliberations, but not in the way anyone expected. Justice Brennan, reviewing the footage of Kendrick Williams's death, had gone pale during conference. "The officer, he used the exact same language Thompson used," Brennan said quietly. "The exact same justifications. Sudden movement. Feared for my life. Reached for his waistband. It's like they're reading from a script." "They are," Diana said. "The Brotherhood created that script. Without oversight, without accountability, that script becomes standard operating procedure." The vote, when it finally came, was 6-3 in favor of allowing expanded federal oversight. Justice Brennan, in a shocking turn, joined the majority. Diana assigned the opinion to Kim, but wrote a powerful concurrence that would be quoted for generations. "We stand at a crossroads between two futures, one where law enforcement serves and protects all citizens equally, and one where it becomes an instrument of oppression for some. The Constitution demands we choose the former. History warns us what happens when we choose the latter. This court must not be a bystander to injustice simply because that injustice wears a badge." The decision was announced on a Thursday morning in June. By Thursday afternoon, protests and celebrations had erupted nationwide. Diana watched from her chambers as crowds gathered outside the Supreme Court, some calling her a hero, others calling for her impeachment. That evening, she received an unexpected call. It was Officer Mitchell Drake, the Chicago officer who had killed Kendrick Williams, calling from jail, where he was being held pending trial. "Justice Washington," he said, his voice young and scared. "I need to tell someone the truth. I was recruited, the Brotherhood. They're not gone, they're just smarter. They found me online in police forums. They taught me their methods, told me I was a warrior, Told me people like Kendrick were the enemy. Why are you telling me this? Because I watched your confirmation hearings. I heard Thompson testify about what you showed him about real justice. I realized I'd become a monster. I killed that kid, and for what? To impress people online, to prove I was tough. His voice broke. I'm 23 years old and I destroyed my life and ended his because I listened to the wrong voices. Diana recorded the conversation with Drake's permission, then immediately forwarded it to Torres. Within hours, the FBI had launched Operation Searchlight, a nationwide investigation into online recruitment and radicalization of police officers. The investigation revealed a horrifying truth. The Brotherhood hadn't died. It had metastasized. Using encrypted forums, private chat groups, and coded language, former members and new recruits had created a digital network spanning the country. They shared tactics for avoiding accountability, methods for justifying violence, and most disturbingly, target lists of judges, prosecutors, and activists they considered enemies. Diana's name was at the top of every list. Her security was immediately increased, but Diana refused to be imprisoned by fear. She continued her work issuing opinions that challenged the status quo and protected the vulnerable. In Martinez versus Texas, she wrote the majority opinion striking down a voter suppression law. In Lee versus Federal Bureau of Prisons, she demanded humane treatment for incarcerated individuals. Each decision added to her reputation as a transformational justice, and each one added to the threats against her. One morning, while reviewing briefs in her chambers, Maria entered with a package. "It's been screened by security," she said. "It's from Thompson." Inside was a manuscript titled "Behind the Badge, A Brotherhood's Rise and Fall" by David Thompson. The dedication read, "To Justice Diana Washington, who showed me that strength isn't about domination, but about doing what's right even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." Diana spent the weekend reading Thompson's book. It was brutal in its honesty, documenting not just the crimes of the Brotherhood, but the psychology that enabled them. Thompson wrote about the indoctrination process, how recruits were taught to see certain citizens as less than human, how violence was normalized and even celebrated. One passage particularly struck her. "We told ourselves we were protecting society, but we were destroying it. Every person we brutalized, every family we terrorized, every community we occupied rather than served. We created the very chaos we claimed to be preventing." Justice Washington understood this. "When I struck her, I thought I was displaying strength. She showed me I was displaying weakness, the weakness of a man who needs violence to feel powerful." Diana decided to write the foreword, but not the one Thompson might have expected. She wrote about transformation, about the possibility of redemption, even for those who had committed terrible acts. But she also wrote about accountability, about the necessity of consequences, about the difference between forgiveness and forgetfulness. "David Thompson nearly killed my faith in justice," she wrote. "But his transformation, incomplete and ongoing as it may be, has restored my faith in the possibility of change." This book is not an absolution of his crimes, but a documentation of how good people can be led to do evil things when systems of accountability fail. May it serve as a warning and a guide for reform. The book's publication created a firestorm. Some praised Diana for her magnanimity in writing the foreword. Others accused her of being too forgiving of betraying victims of police violence. Diana weathered both responses with equanimity, knowing that justice was never about universal approval, but about doing what was right. 6 months later, Operation Searchlight had resulted in over 200 arrests nationwide. The Digital Brotherhood network had been largely dismantled, though everyone knew new networks would eventually form. Evil, Diana had learned, was like water, always seeking the lowest ground, always finding new channels. During this period, Diana received word that Dorothy Chen had fallen ill. At 93, Dorothy had finally begun to slow down, though her mind remained sharp. Diana flew to Atlanta to visit her, finding the elderly woman in a hospice facility surrounded by family and decades of memories. "Justice Washington," Dorothy said with a weak smile. How grand that sounds. Diana took her hand, feeling the paper-thin skin and prominent bones. Mrs. Chen, you're the one who deserves that title. You fought when there was no hope of winning. But you won, Dorothy whispered. You actually won. We won, Diana corrected. All of us together. Dorothy squeezed her hand with surprising strength. Promise me something. Promise me you'll keep fighting. Not for justice as an abstract concept, but for the people who need it. For the next young woman who gets arrested for trying to vote or walking while black or demanding her rights. I promise, Diana said, tears flowing freely. Dorothy Chen died 3 days later. Diana delivered the eulogy at a funeral attended by hundreds, including civil rights leaders, politicians, and ordinary citizens whose lives Dorothy had touched. In her remarks, Diana said, Dorothy Chen planted seeds of justice in ground that seemed barren. Today we stand in the garden she cultivated with her courage, watered with her tears, and tended with her unwavering belief that tomorrow could be better than today. Returning to Washington, Diana found the court embroiled in a new controversy. A case called Ferguson v. Department of Justice challenged the very federal oversight powers the court had upheld in Robinson. The plaintiffs argued that federal intervention had gone too far, that local communities were being stripped of their autonomy. During oral arguments, Diana found herself confronting a painful truth. Some communities, particularly wealthy white communities, were using the language of local control to avoid accountability for discriminatory policing. They had learned to speak the language of federalism while practicing the politics of exclusion. Counsel. Diana addressed the attorney for Ferguson. Your client argues for local control, but the statistics show that 92% of traffic stops in your community target black drivers, despite them making up only 8% of the population. Is that the local control you're seeking to preserve? The attorney stammered through a response about statistical anomalies and geographic factors, but Diana pressed on. Let me be more direct. Is your client seeking the freedom to discriminate without federal interference? The question hung in the air, its implications clear. The attorney eventually managed, my client seeks only to govern its police force according to local values and needs. And if those local values include racial profiling? Justice Brennan intervened. Justice Washington, that's a loaded question. Diana turned to him. It's a loaded situation, Justice Brennan. We can't pretend that local control hasn't historically been code for maintaining discriminatory systems. The deliberations were fierce. Diana found herself isolated at times, with even some liberal justices wary of appearing to completely dismiss federalism concerns. But she persisted, circulating memo after memo, documenting how federal oversight had demonstrably reduced police violence and civil rights violations. Kim eventually sided with her, as did Rodriguez and the other liberal justices. The decision was 5-4, with Diana writing a majority opinion that carefully distinguished between legitimate local governance and using federalism as a shield for discrimination. The public reaction was predictable but intense. Diana received death threats daily. Now her security detail expanded to unprecedented levels for a Supreme Court justice. But she also received thousands of letters of support from citizens who felt seen and protected by her jurisprudence. One letter particularly moved her. It was from Aisha Williams, now in her final year of law school. Justice Washington, I've been following your opinions since I was that little girl with the sign. You've taught me that justice isn't about winning or losing, but about constantly pushing forward, constantly demanding better. I've accepted a job with the Civil Rights Division of the DOJ. I'm going to fight for federal oversight of police departments inspired by your work. The torch you lit is being carried by thousands of us now. As Diana's 7th year on the court began, she reflected on the journey from Thompson's assault to this moment. The physical attack had healed, but it had left her with something more valuable than an unblemished body, a scarred but unbreakable spirit, and a platform to reshape American justice. Thompson himself had become an unlikely ally in reform efforts. His book had become required reading in several police academies, and he regularly spoke to law enforcement groups about the dangers of extremist ideology. He remained in prison, but had become a different kind of warrior, fighting against the very beliefs he had once embraced. In a video conference with a police academy class which Diana watched from her chambers, Thompson said something that resonated. "I thought Justice Washington was my enemy because she held me accountable. Now I understand she was trying to save me from myself." Every officer watching this, remember that accountability isn't your enemy. It's your salvation from becoming what I became. The work continued, case by case, opinion by opinion. Diana knew she hadn't solved the problem of police brutality or racial injustice. Such problems weren't solved by individual actors, no matter how powerful. But she had changed the conversation, shifted the legal landscape, and perhaps most importantly shown that victims of injustice could rise to positions where they could prevent others from suffering the same fate. Late one evening, as Diana prepared to leave the court building, she passed the portrait gallery where her own image now hung among the other justices. The portrait captured her in her robes, but the artist had included a subtle detail that most viewers missed: a faint shadow on her cheek where Thompson's blow had landed. It was a reminder, permanent and powerful, that she had earned her place not through privilege, but through pain transformed into purpose. As she walked to her car, Diana thought about the young officers just beginning their careers, the children who would grow up in a world where federal oversight of police was normal, the future justices who might never have to experience what she experienced to understand why accountability mattered. The Brotherhood had tried to break her, but they had instead broken themselves against her resolve. Thompson had tried to deny her access to justice, but had instead launched her to its highest levels. The system that had failed so many had been forced to confront its failures through her very presence. Diana's driver, Marshal Peters, a young black man who had become something of a confidant over the years, asked, "Ready to go home, Justice Washington?" "Yes, Peters, but tomorrow we're back at it." "The work never ends, does it?" Diana smiled, thinking of Dorothy Chen's funeral, of Kendrick Williams's mother, of Aisha Williams's letter, of Thompson's transformation, of all the battles fought and yet to fight. "No, Peters, it never ends. But that's okay. Justice isn't a destination, it's a journey, and we're still traveling." As the car pulled away from the Supreme Court building, Diana saw a group of young law students taking photos in front of the building, their faces bright with hope and ambition. One of them, a young black woman, was wearing a t-shirt that read, "Justice Washington was right." Diana didn't know what specific opinion or action the shirt referred to, and it didn't matter. What mattered was that a new generation was watching, learning, and preparing to continue the fight. The Brotherhood might resurrect itself in new forms, but so would the resistance to it. Thompson's fist had started something he never could have imagined, not just one woman's journey to the Supreme Court, but a movement that would outlive them all.